The other thing we have to say about this is during this fight, the guy's like, you look just like him. I didn't think I'd find another one of us. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Fighting. And then towards the end, he's like, no, we're both the bastard's children. And he's like, no, it's impossible. And he kills him in the most wild, barbaric... He basically Vlad the Impalers them, if you're familiar with that, but specifically...
through the butt.
Like... Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, your host, Maria, and with me today are my handsome bitches, Katie and William.
Hey guys, and today we have such an interesting book to talk about. Katie, what book are we reading today?
We're reading Shadow of the Conqueror by Shad something.
Shad M. Brooks. Better known online by his YouTube channel, Shadiversity.
Oh, I've heard of that thrown around in the back hindbrain.
For those who don't know, I pick books on this podcast because I am, let's be real, a man. They just kind of do whatever I say and jump in without thinking about it. Yep. So both of them kind of vaguely know the name Shadiversity, but I don't think either of them have ever really watched his videos or anything.
I have no idea what his videos are about. I have never actually seen one in the wild. I don't even know I don't know what this guy looks like. I don't know what his thumbnails are like. I don't know if he's one of those guys. Like, I don't know, because it sounds like university. I don't know what he's universiting. Like, I don't know what he explains. Any of it. I got 0.
I also do not care enough to look into any of this, nor do I have the time and wherewithal to watch, no offense, any other booktubers.
Well, he's not a booktuber. So here's a little bit of background. Shadiversity does a lot of historical sword kind of content. Like, if you had a lightsaber, how would you fight with it? Specifically, the 2 videos I remember watching of his...
Oh, that sounds like fun, though.
...that I first found him were what weapons would a Minotaur have and what weapons would a Centaur have. And I watched those videos and I remember thinking, oh, wow, this is really smart. This is actually, very interesting. He's very smart.
Oh, God, that explains so much why the fight scenes are so mechanical. He literally does sword... Oh, my God.
When I make lists for this this channel, I either pick books I like or books that are books that I think are popular, would be interesting to comment on. In this case, he's a YouTuber. This is on YouTube. Probably we'll get some feedback from this. And so I had kind of forgotten about him. I put him on the list initially, and then I just forgot about him for 3 years. And then I had watched a video about how he thought the Mario movie was too woke. Specifically, the trailer was too woke, and that Princess Peach might be wearing pants the whole time and had a girl boss voice. And I was like, oh, interesting. Maybe we should look at his book again. Maybe this will be an interesting topic. And that is why we are here today after having suffered through 17 hours of this utter toxic trash of a novel. And we should state right off the bat, a lot of times when he's talking about criticism of his book, Shad tends to be like, well, people don't like my political views, so they don't like my book because of it. Maria and Katie don't know who he is. I know more about his political views, but I always try to keep the author separate from the work we're discussing. In this case, we are going to have to go into his political views somewhat because his book espouses his political views. But we're going to do it from the perspective of what does the book say?
Yeah.
Death of the author and all of that.
I know the book, I think prior, just because somebody posted in the Discord a little screenshot of other people, Shad's fans, talking about how it's unfair to, go against the book just because of Shad's. And again, I don't know what his political views are. I could, if you lined up a bunch of men and were like, pick Shad, I'd be like, no fucking clue. It could be Will. Will could be Shadiversity,
okay,
for
first
all
of all,
I know.
What the? That is a lot of shade to be slinging for no reason.
I just mean, I don't know. And so please note that none of the criticism that we're about to lob, and I'm talking like a full volley of arrows, the orcs coming.
I'm thinking more like the river at Isengard.
I'm thinking more like Iron Man first movie when he's getting waterboarded in Iraq or whatever. That's what I'd like to do to this book.
Maria, what is the premise of this book?
Okay, so the basic premise of this book is we are in a fantasy sci-fi steampunk world that makes no sense right now, but we'll try at some point to explain. A sci-fi fantasy steampunk world, we have our main character who is an old man who has done great and terrible war crimes. He was previously known as Dallas the Conqueror. He was a tyrant. He did not great things to young women, just like a lot of bad stuff. But now he is going, at the start of a book, he's going to die. But lo and behold, the light, the god power of this world, the light has seen fit to turn him into a young man and bestow upon him great power. And now he's on a quest to live he's like, oh God, all I wanted was to die. But now the light has told me I must live with the guilt of my crimes, but I swear from this day forward, I shall redeem myself and only fight for good. That's the premise.
And also, I wish I could die, but my true punishment is to live.
To live.
Okay, for a hot second, I would like to say at one point a character calls him out on how dumb that sounds. And a character's like, that is so hypocritical. You're so dumb. That is so delusional. And then like 5 seconds later, he's like, no, living is such a horrible thing. Like instantly bipolar switch.
Here's the thing. Usually we've read a lot of bad books on this channel. A lot. This is odious in a way that the others aren't, because this book is gross in terms of what it says about people and what the morals and themes of the book are. This is also probably the first time we have to issue a legitimate trigger warning for people.
Yeah.
This book will talk about grape, which we have to call grape because this is YouTube, or essay is also how we'll refer to it. And also, just bear in mind, most of the time this is always referring to underage women. Even if we don't explicitly say so. So this is a trigger warning for that kind of thing if you are sensitive to it, or if you just want to sit it out. We have a lot of books, a lot of reviews of books we like that you can go to. Those will be in the description below. Also, if you're going to comment something like, why don't you guys ever like books? We do. We have a playlist about it. It's in the description. Let's state some of our issues with this book in general, and we'll try to keep this to like about 7 minutes, because otherwise we could rant about this book for an hour and a half before even getting to the plot.
A lot of my complaints about this book started from chapter 1. I think more so than most, I mean, nobody in our Discord liked this. Obviously we didn't like this, but I think for me, my dislike of it started squarely in the first chapter. I find the world building, interesting ideas, very clunky execution. This author struggles with things being very mechanical, not feeling naturally integrated into the descriptions or the plot. It was painful from the beginning. I remember there's a scene in the first chapter where he tries to describe a dark stone, and I had to listen to it 3 times to figure out what that, and it was just clunky,
yeah, me too.
Badly worded, and it just, I was so happy when we got past the point where he was trying to describe the mechanics of his world, because it is not, like,
Wait a second.
he has
He
very... I mean, but it was less, like, the beginning was really bogged down. Now, the mechanic of his powers, that, we'll get to that stays the whole time, but the actual trying to describe the world building, very clunky. As Katie mentioned, the power structure, and I hate using the term power, but the magic in this world works like video game logic, to the point where instead of being like, I have this much power and I can apply it to these things, he's like, I have 4 bonds and I can apply a bond to these.
It's his skill tree.
And other people also have skill trees, but slightly different, and it just makes it where it doesn't feel like an organic world. It feels like somebody was trying to write a video game and then got forced into writing a novel and was like, oh man, I really liked these ideas. I refuse to leave them on the cutting room floor. Also, our main character, Dalen, and we're all going to have this complaint, so I'm just going to put this right here. This book is going to try so hard to, number one, make you think Dalen is the best boy, but also the worst boy. Like, and a perfect example of this is being a tyrant, war criminal, mass murderer was not bad enough for this author to instill upon the reader how bad Dalen was when he was younger. They also had to add the SA of young women repeatedly, like 400 something young women. It is insane that, like, that was, the author is trying. So Dalen the Conqueror feels wildly just like almost mustache twirling and gross, and then The book is going to try really hard to make you think that current Dalen is bestest boy, despite the fact that it's the same person. It's just 20 years. Like, it's a 20-year difference. Now, a lot can happen in 20 years. The problem is, though, that we never actually see on screen as readers the one moment we need to even remotely, like, again, let's say this book ended up working as far as redeeming and like, a lot of the moral and ethical things in it were less icky. This book fails because we do not get to see the moment that this guy goes from being, I am a justified, good ruler and everything I've done has been justified, from, oh God, what have I done? I am a monster. That happens before we walk on, and that is the greatest character movement of the entire book, and it happened off screen like 10 years ago. Like, we don't even know how long ago it happened or why exactly it happened.
We will never learn throughout the book. You keep thinking this is something that's going to drop, and it keeps
that there's going to be a revelation, like he met someone or something. Nope, he just got to it on his own, all by self, when left to his own devices enough, because and it's a wild thing to do. The other problem is Dalen dispenses punishment in his quest to do good, dispenses punishment throughout the book that is the exact opposite of what he is arguing with his own existence, which is people can change and do good. And the book is going to argue that people, once they've changed and they can do good, that there is a argument to let them do good. And so for a restorative justice and a remunerative, what's the term?
Restorative.
Restorative justice. Meanwhile, on his path to good, he murders a ton of people, offering none of them the chance for redemption, learning.
You silly woman, he does it one time.
He sees the light in them. He sees... No, you guys are forgetting. He can see the light in...
Don't get me started.
I don't know why the author picked this premise. I understand the premise. It's an interesting premise. Basically, what if Stalin, with way more SA for some reason...
And blue hair.
And blue hair, like, realized at the end of his life, like, oh, can I redeem myself? And so the book is supposed to be up questions about redemption and forgiveness and punishment and justice.
Identity. Mm-hmm.
The problem is that the author has no ability to write this. None. He would struggle with the interiority and the emotional complexity of a fetch quest. And for some reason, he decided to take on this extremely complex and complicated and morally difficult and nuanced topic. And I don't know why. And on top of that, he himself is too attached to Dalen as a wish fulfillment character. Now, what will happen is people, and he, I'm sure, would argue, oh, no, you're not supposed to like Dalen. Dalen's a bad guy. You can tell because the books keep saying he does bad guy stuff. No. Here's why that doesn't work. Because his bad guyness is an informed trait for the most part, in terms of all the slaughter he did. And also, it's a shield. It's a shield so he can say, like, oh, we already said he wasn't bad. So when he gleefully does all these things, like he's funny, he's super good looking, he trounces everyone on the floor, you can point to it and go like, oh no, it's for real, guys, he's a bad guy, this is just showing how bad he is. There's nothing inherent in the premise of Stalin tries to figure out what's up later in his life that requires him to be young and hot, to be good at fighting, to be the best with his force powers that there ever was. These things are all things Shad decided to put in the book because he wanted them for Dalen. Dalen is a wish fulfillment character. He gets to have the cool lines. He gets to say the stuff. The women want to bang him. And when we do talk about his crimes, they're always framed in the I feel so guilty for the things I did. This might as well be Batman feeling bad about his parents, for all of it has an effect on his actions. The book will not focus on what it is like to be a victim, despite being in the viewpoint of one of his victims for a while. And again, some of this I think comes down to the fact that the author could not write a fetch quest. He just could not do it. And so he tried to take on this extremely difficult concept without any of the tools to do so. Also, he should have just written a fucking technical manual. That's the only thing he cares about in this book, is describing his stupid magic powers constantly.
It's really actually complex. Like Dalen, the character, and why he is so flawed. This could literally be an essay as far as like how it is so poorly represented. It's because, as Will was saying, first of all, he's constantly telling you he feels bad, but then he doesn't act like he feels bad or that he's learned anything. When he's an old man in the beginning, he actively calls people little snots. And like he's like crotchety old shit. And the whole time he's horrible. He's not a nice person. And as Will was saying, one might say, oh, you're not supposed to like him. Well, first of all, you really should like your protagonist for the most part. That's what's going to make you empathize with them and want to go on the journey with them. But in the event that we are not supposed to like that character, there should be a very clear message as to far as why we're not supposed to like him. But again, as Will said, this character not only did all those things where he's like super hot, also awkwardly has a hard-on at random moments, and it tells us, which that's so not necessary. It doesn't do anything except for make him feel gross. But also, Dalen in this story has created everything. He is the Tony Stark of this world. He has engineered. He's a massive genius. He's a master of the sword. Barely anyone becomes master of the sword, but he's one of them. And not just that, but now he has these Lightbringer powers or Lightbinder powers or whatever. But the point is he has magical abilities. He's made everything in the world to where when somebody's like, oh, da-da-da-da-da about this feature of the city, then he's like, oh, in my mind, yes, I created that because I'm so smart because of all these reasons, and then says, oh yeah, super smart thing about the thing, and they're like, oh my gosh, how do you know about that? And also, Dalen becomes young, right? Well, first of all, what a messy, clunky thing for Dalen to be like, yes, I'm going to commit suicide, yes, I'm going to jump off a cliff. And when he jumps off that cliff, he's like, I'm just going to flow on the wind until I hit the magical barrier of this world. And magically, with no explanation, which again is fine, I suppose. It depends on how it's being. It could be acceptable considering, but it isn't in this case. But like, he magically turns young when none of this light stuff has anything to do with youth giving or anything like that. How does it backwards time? Then we get a tutorial of how he uses his powers by falling out of the sky, and it takes fucking forever. Anyway, my point is, though, getting to this, right, is that Dalen consistently always actively tells you, the reader, how guilty he feels. He doesn't show any learning, except for like this very clunky, half-assed version of it where he keeps making the same mistakes over and over again, and he keeps being told, oh, don't make those mistakes, and finally in some way, it's unnatural, he starts making better choices. But even then, like Maria or whoever said, he starts distributing justice, like, and in what way does that show? Anyway, so all of those ethical and thematic messages are so matched and everything. But more importantly than any of this, for me, and this is what I told Maria before, but like, honestly, the weirdest, most uncomfortable thing in this book is that the theme is not about SA. The theme is not about, like, the main focus is not that he was a horrible predator that is now got to learn from his... He was a whole political thing. There are so many other things going on in this story. But then the middle of the book, like 75% of the book is repeat after repeat after repeat of telling us how disgusting he is. And yet there's no there's no comeuppance.
The book also tries to get him off the hook with that part.
Yes!
Like, he says, I was the worst person ever, but the book is like, but maybe his advisors liked him a little bit. And also, because they got... Well, I'll save that for the end. But
yeah, so this is something that I was going to comment from what both of you said, that one thing we really have to stress here is the book, despite it saying Dalen was the worst ever, the book consistently undermines that. Someone will say, well, this happened, and Dalen will be like, but what about all the good I did? And, like, these things, and I stopped this thing, and no one was actually starving. And then, like, with the essay stuff, he'll be like, well, I didn't exactly know. And at every point, the author is giving him an out. Like a little baby, like here you go, follow this the crumb and you'll lead to salvation.
Even if he felt bad, it doesn't, there's no redemption for that.
The book also despite him being a dick, like, he says real rude stuff. He's really rude to people all the time. He does some really fucked up stuff to people in part of his, I'm going to be good now and do my judgment upon people with no court, even though there is a court system. There is a legal system for dispensing justice. Even though that exists, there's this weird, like, you could tell that the author wanted his Batman, but the legality as well. And we're gonna talk. There's literally a point where Dalen is like, "I shall become the knight and the good, and I shall kill, and I shall use these powers for good."
She's not kidding. There is literally, and also it's an afterthought. It happens off screen, but it's told to us that he just randomly does a side quest where he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go kill some essayers, and this one woman who's like torturing a kid or something. There's also this weird obsession, like Lindbergh said in the chat. There's this weird obsession just with sexuality, sex, not sexuality, sex, just sex.
Yeah. And the overall conclusion that the book comes to about it is so gross and weird. And I'm sure we'll get there.
Just to finish my thought is that despite him doing all of this stuff, other people witnessing the weird ways he dispenses his justice, he's still liked by other characters. One of the things that Will and I and Katie have talked about is that if you have a character that is supposed to be unlikable, that the book is supposed to be condemning, that you lead the reader to that. We lobbied this against Iron Widow. Again, it shall come up. But we've also talked about other books which did it well, where like the other characters around the main character go, oh no, honey, that's a no good. We don't like that. And the characters here, even in the moments where he does do weird fucked up shit, they're like, you dispensed justice. You caught them in flagrante. Like,
it's even worse than that, because it's not that straightforward. They're like, oh, Dalen, why are you such a homicidal maniac? But then 5 seconds later, they're like, well, I suppose those were bad people.
Those
so
were justified.
You're forgiven for, so you're forgiven for that, even though that's very strange.
The other thing that I was getting to with the whole, he wanted his Batman, but wanted it to be legally good, is that there is a law in this world where if you catch someone in the middle of committing the crime and the penalty for that crime is death, you can just kill them right then and there. Like, you can just dispense that. Like, that is a rule in this world. And it feels like one of those rules that exists so the author can be like, he's Batman, but also within the law. Like, we get all... And it's a wild thing to do.
He never brings up also that he's the one that created that law, and maybe having a law like that in place is bad, and that was one of the bad things he does. Because that's another thing the book will do, is it'll be like, well, it was bad, but he also outlawed slavery, and wasn't that kind of good, and he also built these cities, but he just... And again, there's this very weird wanting to have your cake and eat it too, and the book is incredibly frustrating in those ways. But I do think we should start on the plot. Because so much of it is so stupid and it's so long.
I normally wait until after these videos to eat, but I knew this was going to be a long video, so I ate beforehand.
Yeah, no, this is definitely... So, for those of you that do not know, I started a new job. It's exhausting. And every day on the way fucking home, I had to turn on Audible to listen to this. And let me tell you, it was just such a chore. Oh, at 2 times speed. I've never been able to listen to a book at 2 times speed and still understand it. That's how, like, dry this is.
I suppose that's the other thing we need to lob at this. One of its greatest crimes. It's just a boring book.
Oh, yeah, it's awful.
It just is. Any tension it remotely tends to build, it cuts with a long explanation of Darkstone physics, or how to power jump, or how to do this other thing with his power.
Oh, also, wait, my favorite part, before we get started so I don't forget. He can channel his light power that he sucks out of the light of things and within himself to boost his fortitude. That's the wording. To boost his fortitude, to boost his intelligence, to boost his healing capabilities. Like, it's so on the nose. Like, and maybe, like, that could work, but it doesn't. It just doesn't.
Also, he can boost his sword fighting skills, which simultaneously increases. So the thing is, I have so many soapboxes about this, because you should not be able to increase fortitude. You should not be able to increase your sword fighting skills. Those should be things you have to. And also, there's this point where he increases his perception and is suddenly able to identify stuff that, unless you have physically learned what those things are, even if you see them, you shouldn't know. Like, he's like, I could tell you the exact kind of wood, or that staring at this drawer, it had a hidden compartment in it. Like, no, you shouldn't be able to know that unless you have learned what that looks like. Perception doesn't mean you just know things.
Not related to that, but my favorite thing in this book is that days are called falls, but he forgets that every once in a while, and his editor didn't catch it.
Stop.
So every once in a while, they'll say days, and also, at the same time, people wear slacks and drink scotch. And it's like, why would you go out of the way to make your stupid day-night cycle called something else and then forget to not put scotch in?
Make any sort of alien drink. Oh, it was a Bit and Bop. You know?
A Dornish Red.
Yeah, exactly. Why? Just, it's something generic, but you can still do that. No, so lazy. Oh, it's a good vintage of scotch.
We're gonna have so much shit to go through as we go through this. You have no idea, guys. Strap the fuck in. It's been a while. This book starts with an old man. He is old, he is crotchety, he grumpy. His name is Dalen Namara. And he is the... How old is he? Like 80-something?
88. He's 88.
He's like the 88-year-old, like, old man remains of... and I don't even want to say that. This book is incredibly age-phobic. We're going to get to a point.
I know.
But, like, this book is going to be like... Oh, God. Anyway, and so we have this old guy, and he's like, I'm going to end my life now. I've lived a terrible life. I'm a terrible person. Now is the time for me to, I feel myself dying naturally of natural causes. So now, just a couple days ahead of when I'm actually supposed to die, I'm going to kill myself. Because living my life with my guilt for the past 20 years, or undefined amount of time since he learned that he was a terrible person.
Right off the bat, we're already, like, negating his whole message. Because Dalen says, oh, I must live, so I may live in torture of my sins. And yet, he's like, I'm not going to let myself feel pain for the next few days. Instead, I'm just going to jump off a cliff so that way I can choose my end. And it's like, that negates your whole point.
Katie, but the suffering of only being able to eat broth because you're old, you don't understand. The book will constantly play very tight and loose, or whatever the thing is, or something and fast.
Fast and loose.
Fast and loose. That's right, guys. I have an English degree. With the idea of, like, what he considers suffering and what he doesn't, and what's tolerable and what he can die and what he can't.
He has gotten a guy from the village he has lived in for the past 20 years as a tinkerer. He's just been like the old crouchy guy that people bring their stuff to so that he can fix it, because before he was even Dalen the Conqueror, Dalis the Conqueror, he was an engineer, even though he was 17 when the fourth night happened. So I don't know when he got his engineering degree. But anyway, don't worry about that. You don't need to know. You can be an engineer by 17. I believe in you. Anyway, so he gets this guy from the village to take him on his dark stone carriage, like, wagon thing, and we get a whole thing about dark stones, and if you have light shining on them, then you can move them, but there's no light, you can't move them, and it's super clunky. I hate it. It's gonna come up 100 times, and you also get a light stone. Also, this world is, like, inverted. Yeah, there's the continent,
which is a cool concept.
It is. For a writer who could write this better, because unfortunately the execution of describing this to you is very confusing and just wild.
My husband and I were both listening to the beginning of this novel because we were folding laundry together, and he had to suffer through the first hour of this book with me. And there were multiple times during this specific period where he's trying to explain the mechanics of the world where both he and I looked at each other as I was folding socks and he was folding a shirt, and we were like, did you understand that? And he's like, can you replay it? And we had to replay multiple parts 3 to 5 times normal speed just to understand what was trying to be explained to us.
There's a continent, there's a giant world, like a plate, if you will, and then there's a sun affixed in the sky in a specific position, and then above that is the mirror image of this continent. And so, if someone were to jump off the edge of this continent, they go down from this one, falling this way towards this one, and then they just go loopy, 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 loop. Depending on if you jumped off a cliff, kind of. I mean, if you jump off, I don't know. Eventually, he's able to land on Earth stuff, but essentially, if you go to like a caverny point where there's no like space, you're just gonna fall in a loop forever. And the sun doesn't move. It's just affixed to a certain point, which means that if there are any mountains, anything on the other side of those mountains, you fucked. Congratulations, you live in darkness. This book mentions briefly at one point there's one place that suffers from this, but if you're on the wrong side of the sun, you're just, it never goes into it, because another thing in this world that we have to explain now is the greatest evil on this world are the shade.
Which never are really utilized, number one. And number two, this world sounds so cool. It's never used for anything. Nope. There's never any meaning behind the whole loopy stuff and like all of that.
Also, there's no nighttime. Did I get that correctly? Please someone correct me if I'm wrong. Does it ever get dark
There's
at night?
no time.
I remember at one point he was like, it was still very bright. And I'm like, so the sun's just there always. And then, and that makes sense because the idea is there are days. So there's falls. The fall is how long it takes something to fall from the one edge to the other edge of this little sandwich world. That's a fall, and that is what this world uses as days. I hate that I'm explaining this. It's so fucking annoying. Okay, but I need to explain this because there are nights. There was 4 nights, and Dalen Namara lived through the 4th night, and apparently this world that is always bright, I guess you have blackout shades for sleeping. There are nights sometimes where there is no light, like I don't know what happens. Nobody ever explains what the fuck happens to the sun. Where does it go? But every once in a while,
shit.
Yeah, this is like Game of Thrones. You know where the Starks are like, winter is coming, and like there's a winter that comes every year, but then there's like the winters that last for a very long time.
No, but go ahead.
Anyway, but
that's
the point
incorrect,
is,
but go ahead.
I don't care. But in this, it's like that, but with days and nights, where days can last like 20 years and nights can last
That's
like
the way
7 years.
That's the way I pictured it. But also, I'm like confused. Isn't it so that if you're in darkness too long, you became a shade?
You become
thing?
a shade. Yes, I was just going to get that.
Okay,
So
sorry.
shades are these creatures that exist when there is no light, and then their bodies, because apparently a part of this world's religion mechanic is there is the light. And the light is not just like, oh, look, the sun. Hi, nice to see you. Give us vitamin D and the plants grow and all that jazz. No, oh, nay, nay. Oh, nay, nay. The light is a divine being that is imbued in everything. Rocks, trees, plants, animals, but it's in everything. And but except for the only thing that it's not in are shades, which are creatures, peoples that have been denied light so long that their inner light has left them, because everyone, all humans have an amount of inner light, and when that light is fully gone, now you become a heckin' shade. What are shades' powers? This book will barely touch it. Why are they so hard to kill? Guess what? Bullets don't work against them. Only swords. Also, they don't call bullets bullets here. They have a different term for them. I'm not going to get into them, and I'm just going to call them bullets.
Also, like, not just that, they are easy to kill. He very easily kills many of them later on with no problem whatsoever, almost.
I want to say that I read this book and I listened, and it was 17 hours long. I listened to it at double speed, so it was closer
18.
to like it's closer to 9. Maria just explained this more clearly, and I understand the
she did.
mechanics of the world now more than I did from the actual fucking book, which never shuts up about this.
I re-listened to it a lot because I was like, it's my job to tell the plot, so I have to.
Yes.
So you have to know. Like, there's a bunch of stuff you mentioned that I'm like, oh, that's what they were talking about.
You're welcome.
I genuinely tried to understand some of it, and I did for the most part, but not very intimately. And also this light thing, right? So in a sense, it's like, yeah, it's in everything. So it's kind of like maybe they see, some people see it as, it's addressed at one point where some people see it as like a god or goddess or whatever, or like, you know, some type of greater spirit. And then for the most part, it's treated kind of more like just like an inanimate object that happens to have some type of will, like the Force. It's like the Force.
The Force. It's
yes. Yeah, it's literally like the Force. But so let's just run this down real quick. The light powers things. Mm-hmm. The light affects people whether or not they change into creatures. The light is also able to do a whole bunch of different power things, like endless power things. And then also the light tells you how not good a person is, although it's often mistaken for how good a person is by Dalen and many others, because like they use that to measure whether or not someone's worthy of being killed because they're too evil. But then it is very obviously and multiple times stated, no, it's not that they are good. It's that they are very, very sure of themselves and like think that what they are doing is right, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why the light reflects that if the light's job isn't to necessarily, like, why does it have so many jobs? And the jobs don't have anything to do with each other, really. Nope. And then, like, anyway, so yeah. That doesn't make any sense.
We're going to have to go into the whole inner light thing later because we're going to have to rant about that for a really long time because it's so stupid. But yes, those are the basic mechanics of the universe, I think. And through like all this magic stuff, they also have magic tech. Like that's just all they have. It's like steampunk but with light, and that sounds cool and it isn't. It's just like him constantly talking about how things work. You just zone it out at a certain point. But Dalen's plan is he's going to take some light and a dark and he's going to jump off, and that should jump off the edge of the world, and that should double kill him.
Yeah, so the idea is if you jump off the edge of the world to do the folly thing, eventually you get to the point where you stop falling, and then you end up back at the top and you continue falling. And they call that the barrier. And apparently, if you pass the barrier holding a dark stone or a sunstone, you're just obliterated into nothingness. And he's like, well, why have one when you could have both? So we get this whole dumb thing where him and the village guy go through. He, like, berates the village guy. The village guy thinks he can duels. And then an 88-year-old man who has not held a sword or fought anyone in years is able to disarm and get first blood from a man 40 years his younger who regularly has been practicing. And listen, sword fighting, like any skill at all, if you don't do it or practice it for 20 years, it's not just ingrained into you. The first time I got on a bike after 10 years of not being on a bike, I fell off. I had to partially relearn how to do it. My muscles weren't just like, I got you, bro. I crashed into a bush, okay? You don't just pick up a sword at 8. And also, please note, this man, he old. He real fucking old, okay? He's hobbly. And the book kind of, I have to explain this because this is our second main character, but as he's getting ready to leave his house, waiting for his guy to bring this wagon and take him off, there's a light bringer. Yes, a light bringer sitting on a bench near his house, and him and this guy have a conversation. The light bringer's like, I'm waiting for someone. And he's like, who the fuck are you waiting for? And he goes, I don't know, but he's a younger guy. So I'm just going to sit here and wait for him. The light told me to. And the light bringers are just like these, like, light priests. Like, they have to make a vow to be good. And, like, if they lie or do anything that goes against their vow, they lose their powers of light stuff. And they
Which
can,
we
like,
later learn is not true.
It does for them. It's the light binders that are different.
It's the light again is basically like the Force, and there's gonna be Jedi we meet later, but this guy is like basically he's like a paladin who naturally is a miracle worker guy. Yes. I forget what his name is.
Aric. And so I'm mentioning this because we're going to come back to this guy. But anyway, so he goes on this thing with this guy. During this period, we get explanations about the sky ships and a bunch of world building that just, I hate it.
So one of the things about the fight that it's so stupid that he wins the fight from a logistical perspective of he's just an old man, and the book tries to be like, well, he was just revitalized a little by the paladin. Okay, yeah. But here's the thing. From a character perspective, he should lose this fight. Because he, up until this point, has been very crotchety and old and kind of annoying. And you know one of the best ways to get readers to like a character who is unlikable? Have them eat shit.
Shit.
Okay? This is Tony Stark. One of the reasons we like him, besides the fact that he's played by Robert Downey Jr., is immediately in his movie, he has to eat so much shit. He immediately is captured, imprisoned, made useless. It would be so funny if Dalen went into this fight being like, ha, I'm gonna win, and then he just loses. It actually would have endeared the character more to you than this, like, oh, I'm super great. And that's the thing, is that Galen is a wish fulfillment character, so he can never be weak. There's never a point in the book where someone captures him or has the upper hand physically on him, except for one point at the end. And that's the thing about Dalen is, even if you forget all of his crimes, like, again, if this was just the same character but we don't talk about his crimes, those didn't happen, he would be so insanely annoying and such a Mary Sue. And that's why the Conqueror thing is a shield, because it's just a way of going like, oh, well, but he's a tyrant, so he has all these abilities and you're not supposed to like him. Like, it's that kind of a thing, and it's so incredibly frustrating as the book goes on. How
saps tension.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God, does it ever.
Every fight. So part of the thing is making his superpowers so superpowered, and like this author also can't figure out if Archknights are these unstoppable, powerful forces that are really hard to kill, or if you can just like really easily kill them. Because he has so much power, at no point in any of the fight scenes is there any tension. You always know he's going to figure a way out of it, and the book bends over backwards to give him power-ups and super new abilities throughout the entire book. So there's no tension at all. The other thing I need to mention, because it gets brought up when we meet that Aric guy, the Lightbringer, the paladin guy, as Will described him. His first comment, so the Aric is Churasian, and they are the only, as far as I remember, description-wise, dark-skinned people, and apparently they are almost always naked, and we get this immediately because our main character's description is, there was a Churasian man, uncharacteristically fully clothed. And
we'll have to talk about this more.
Yes, I'm just gonna leave that there. Just remember that happened. We'll come to it later.
Chekhov's racist gun.
Chekhov's fully clothed dark-skinned man.
He goes to the edge of the world, and he's like, okay, I have 2 stones. Nobody's even thought to do this before, so I'm going to go over the edge and die. And he goes over the edge, and he's like, okay, I'm going to die, but it's really boring for like a half hour.
Because I'm just falling through nothing.
And then, suddenly, he becomes young and hot. How do we know? Because he says, I have become young again. What is this? How am I not old? All of his hair comes back. He still has his scars, though, which is just a level of, like, what the fuckery that's very weird.
It makes no sense.
We then get 45 minutes, and I'm not kidding. I genuinely think it's about 45 minutes of the audiobook of him thinking about the logistics of how his new powers are going to let him land on the ground without dying. He thinks about this, and the thing is, like, there are ways to do world building and this kind of like magio text stuff that build character. That's not it. He just is literally thinking about this in the most practical way possible. And basically what we learn is that the way this game mechanic works is that he can put light into parts of his body, but he can only put 4 parts of light into his body, but he can double or triple or quadruple them up into a specific part of his body, and he can like change his mass and I think how strong and fast he is, and he can also smell things really good if he does. And again, later we find out that sword fighting is a part of his body he can just shove power into, and also just thinking.
It genuinely is written like you are the character in a video game, you're falling, the wind's going by, and it's being described exactly. I would like to know how he knows exactly that his skills in a certain place are 10 times the ability or 4 times. How does he know that specific thing? It's impossible.
You're completely right. There's a level of detail to the way he describes this. Number one, it's the first thing that I'm going to talk about is how we immediately start getting weird vocabulary for this that strains the verisimilitude of any of this. And he feels like this weird sensation, like he feels all over his body, like he can feel the light touching him, and then he realizes he can draw it into his body, and then he has a certain amount in him, and immediately starts going, I have 4 bonds of light inside me.
Yes.
Because he realizes he can bond light to his strength, his eyes, and he doesn't say his hearing, he says sound. He bonds light to sound, which is
Like
such a nitpick. But it's not sound. It's hearing. Sound is a thing. Anyway, sorry. It's such a tiny nitpick, but it is indicative of how.
Well, it's
this
like
works.
binding a light to air to
Yeah.
breathe. It's like it's an outside force. You can't do that. Maybe. I don't know, because later he does a lot of bullshitty stuff with light.
He does a lot of bullshitty stuff, but immediately he can go, oh, I have 4 bonds worth of light. I can put 1 bond to each thing, or I can put all 4 on the same thing. And that is not an organic way to describe this, because one of the things we do here is we talk about like how to make things work better, and a better way to say is he had an amount of light, like power inside him, and there's a point where he's like, there's a pressure to use it, he has to use it, and he ends up channeling it into something, and saying he can channel it in, and then realizing, oh, I can only I can channel all of it into one thing, or I can split it into different things, and thinking about it that way instead of being like, I have 4 bonds, I can use all 4 on one. Thinking about it as just a mass inside him that he can only split 4 ways after trying makes so much more sense than immediately going, it's 4 bonds, this is how we use them.
The easiest way to introduce this, in lieu of what Maria's saying, is, okay, let's say he, like, you could even say it in the fall, right? So he's falling, and he's like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. Well, first of all, he should have just let himself die. Didn't he want to die? But also, like, let's get past that point. So as he falls, maybe he's like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, and he feels the light build out of it, and all of a sudden, poof, he, like, you know, is able to stop his momentum in some way or something like that. And then he's like, wow, how did I do that? That felt very strange. And then, to make it more organic, he wouldn't try to do that again. Instead, he would try to get his bearings, make it more realistic, make it more grounded. He goes off and does something, and then a dangerous situation for tension comes up, whatever it may be. It could have even been, which we are not there yet, but there's this altercation between him and this dude in an alleyway. It could have even been something like that. It's almost intrinsically, it's already in the book. It's already there. You could have used that. And then let's say, like, you know, he's gonna fall again, or something's attacking him, or he needs to reach something. Like, anything like that, where he accidentally is put into the situation where he discovers there are certain mechanisms that allow him to use these powers. And then through that, maybe he could visualize it and you could get there, but really none of that should have been explained until later when he meets Archknights that know how to use their powers, and then maybe we could use terminology like that, because then it's a pre-existing school of thought.
It's a huge problem because this feels like a tutorial. It feels like you started a video game, you got the cutscene at the beginning. There was a fighting tutorial when you as an old man fought this younger guy and managed to win, which isn't what should have happened. And then you get another cutscene as he stands at the edge of the world and contemplates his life, and then the character jumps off, and then as you're falling, you get a tutorial about a bunch of your other powers.
Abilities.
And then use those new abilities to save your fall. And then, after you survive the fall, continue. So much of this book is just him thinking through, and what it's supposed to be is he's so smart, he doesn't need to learn. He can just think his way through it. He's the smartest boy at school. And it just doesn't work. Because it makes you're just like, how? Why would you know to do this? Is this a commonly... And you learn that the secrets of how the light binders work is super secret and closed off. It's not like wildly understood that this is how their power works or any of this.
We have an in, though, don't forget. Dayless, the Conqueror, sent a spy into the Archknights, so that way he knows all of their little baby no, he doesn't know all their secrets, but he knows some of them.
But barely any, and it never feels like a thing. Also, I have to talk about, because we kind of skipped this part, but when he turned young in the air, he was like, curse you, light! You have cursed me with this young, hot body! I wanted to die, but evidently you are saying I must live and live with my grief, and he's like, and if I must, I shall
At least there's several times where he kind of like looks at himself or whatever, and he's like, God, I'm so hot. And
There's
I'm
literally
just like,
a point point where he's like, and Dalen was sexy if he said so himself.
This is, again, a thing that isn't inherent to the premise of what if Stalin decided to redeem himself. This is the author going, oh, I want him to be hot so that people can fawn over him, and it's just a wish fulfillment thing. Like, that's really all it is. Him being hot doesn't really play a role in the novel. Like, some women will want him, but that's not... He didn't need to be hot for that. And so while he's up in the air, he's like, oh, curse you, light! But then he's like, but the light has saved me, so therefore I cannot kill myself after this. And now the light has said that there is a purpose for me, so I must live. Is it because I am to suffer more? Is it because I am to try to do good now?
Bullshit. My God.
This only works if he is a sufficiently religious character that he would actually believe the light is like, people who are sufficiently religious do kind of believe weird things like this. This book does not have the verisimilitude of a real setting where people will actually believe in their religions. And also the light is treated very much not like a religion and a lot like the light in a D&D setting. Like it's a magical force that some people sort of say has godlike qualities, but it's not actually really treated that way. Nobody thinks of it that way. There's not like light churches or something. And so for him to subsume, and this is a guy, again, who has like a very strong will. He, murdered lots of people. He felt strongly he was a tyrant. To be like, oh, well, this random thing means that like I now should put aside what I want for what the light wants, does not track. It is simply a bad motivation.
Eventually he lands on the ground because he figures out how to like increase his mass but then like decrease it, and then he gets like he just hangs in the air. He decreases his acceleration, like he does stuff so that he like hovers above the ground for a second before he falls, and he has to time it just right. He also has to like whoosh himself over land instead of being over, like the continual dropping cycle. He hits the ground. He's able to heal himself if there was any injuries, but he discovers he has healing powers. But he finds a lake that he can look upon, and he goes, oh, there is my true face. My true face, not the face ravaged by years. I'm sorry. I am sorry, but the face of an older person is as much their true face as being young. And it's not that he's like 25, the face that he had at the height of his power, or like as things. No, he's turned into a 17-year-old. Okay, so to claim that this face we all have at 17, and I don't know about any of you watching here, when I look at my 17-year-old face, I'm like, look at that little round face baby. Her woman jaw didn't come in yet. Like, she's just a babe.
This is a testament, once again, to the strange obsession with sex and youth. I'm just saying.
And innocence, yes.
Yes, and it's very strange. It's because he seems to think, if he thinks that is what the most attractive a person is in their life, it makes me feel massively uncomfortable that this is a reoccurring theme throughout the multiple times. Young women, there's no like adult women that really fawn over him either. I don't know if you guys remember all this, but like there's no real adult women. It's a little girl in the house that we're about to enter. It's another young woman who'd been SA'd. It's another young woman who's been SA'd. And it's somebody he is already, no, actually, that never actually happened.
A middle-aged woman who he SA'd.
Can we just say that there are only 3 female characters that are about to happen, like we're about to meet them, that are the only female characters we meet who are not SA'd. Every other female character.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I am right. Lindbergh pointed it out at some point.
No. The Dockmaster has about 5 lines.
Yes, okay, 4. 4.
But she's old. Don't forget, she's old and gross.
So old.
Yeah.
And Lyra
is like, why is she so old and doing this job? I'm so bored in this conversation.
Yes, Lyra was like
long.
literally like, oh my God, this conversation is going to, and she's so disrespectful. There's such a disrespect for, anyway.
There really is a weird old phobia in this book that's just very weird. Like, the worst thing Shad can imagine is being old. And it's not like this is Dalen's point of view. Again, this is going to be another argument that people make, is that like, oh, well, this whole book is filtered through Dalen's point of view, so the author isn't really supposed to, you're not supposed to think these things. You know, Dalen's supposed to be a bad guy. Okay, so there's a couple of problems. The first is that Dalen is not the only viewpoint we get into. We get into Lyra's point of view later, and she also thinks old people are slow and terrible. So often a lot of what Dalen thinks in his viewpoint will be kind of confirmed by Lyra as well, in terms of, like, this is just a thing the book thinks and the characters in the book think. There's also the fact that Aric.
Yeah, Aric.
Aric is the bestest person ever, and we know because the light hasn't abandoned him. Like, he is the moral authority in the book, both literally in the book and metaphorically in terms of that's his function in the book. And so you need to bear in mind that a lot of the times the stuff Dalen does is okay by Aric, and I already forgot.
Aric, yeah.
Aric, oh yeah, no, that's right. Aric, and, like, it's rubber stamped approved, you know what I mean? Like, all of the stuff he does, it's like, oh, that's terrible, but yeah, you were kind of right. We should have tortured that person to death sodomy style. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Shad the Impaler style.
That's a little slip of the tongue there for you. Just wait, guys. Just wait. It's so bad. But anyway, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna continue plowing ahead. So he ends up going to this. He's found by this guy who's like, "What are you doing here?" And he basically gets invited to this man's home, and it is this matriology, like, it is a society that is somehow very stuck in gender norms, but women are at, like, the top of the hierarchy, despite that, like, women have kids, run the household, take care of babies.
They have to be protected by the men, though. There's still a very strict gender binary there.
Yeah, that was so strange, and it was so uncomfortable, too.
They will never come up again in the book. This is it. This is the one time matriology is explained, is when the author was just like, hey, you know what would be cool if I explained this, like, culture that functions how I think cultures should function.
But, like, women are super important, like, super important. Anyway, and he stays with them, he has a good meal with them, and then he goes off on his way again, and then this is the point where he realizes that he can't reduce his mass, so he can increase his mass, but he shouldn't reduce it, because he reduces his mass to the point that he becomes a thin waif, like an ethereal being, and he starts floating away. So he increases his mass and blows his Legos off.
And then he instantly just heals them, and it's, like, fine. And this there's multiple times in this book where Dalen will legitimately just completely lose parts of his body, and he just grows them back. It's fine. It's easy peasy.
This time it takes a little bit of time because he doesn't have a sunstone on him that he can use, which we'll get to later. But, like, it's also just the book's real laissez-faire. Like, at the end of it, he's like, woof, now I know not to do that anymore. It's not like this terrible, horrific thing. Like, this man has not been in the face of violence or gore for 20 years.
I know.
And he's just like, wow, my legs got blown off. Wowie zowie, now I know.
Talk about destroying the verisimilitude of the book. Like, he does not react like a normal person does, and so it is hard to view him or think of him as a normal person in the ways the book wants us to later. It's one of the things that makes the whole setting feel very distant and artificial. So he decides to go back to his house because he needs to pick up his stuff, and the Black Paladin guy is still hanging out there, and he's like, oh, that's weird. You look just like Dalen the Conqueror. And Dalen's like, oh, you look like him. And
he's so bad. He's so bad. It's so okay. I will say this once you introduce this next concept that's going to happen. But this actually was one of the biggest things that made me angry, besides the weird sex stuff.
Aric's like, okay, whatever, dude, but I imagined you coming here. I had a dream. And Dalen's like, it all must be part of the Light's plan, because he saw that before I turned young. I do have to live and maybe suffer or redeem myself. Again, it's unclear a little bit in my head.
Also, his lie that he thought up walking here was he's the son of the Tinkerer.
I would like to, just for a moment, please let me get on my soapbox, because this is actually something that
Step
made
up
me
on
so
there, man.
angry.
Also, why does the book have soapboxes?
Yeah, they actually do have soapboxes. I know. I wanted to make that joke at one point.
Continue.
So Dalen says that, to cover, of course, that he is truly Daedalus, which nobody could believe anyway. But apparently he just looks exactly like him, and everybody knows this super instantly, even though he was 17 before a lot of people were born. And so I feel like there could be other people that looked like him, but that's neither here nor there. So he says he's the son. there's two things I want to say about this. One, why wasn't he just the son?
Why wasn't this book just about his son?
About his son? Because that is literally his role that he pretends to fulfill for the majority of the book. Make him the son. Easy fix. Second thing, he often will be like, okay, I have to make sure they don't know it's me, Dallas, the Conqueror. But then he frequently and very lazily is just like, boy, girl. And then somebody's like, you can't say boy or girl. Yeah. And then they're like, what are you talking about? You're a young whippersnapper. And he's like, I'm older than you could put, like, I've been through so much. And it's
I'm older than you could possibly know.
Yes, I know. And so he very, 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 at every single fucking turn, says something he should not be saying as the son of Dalen. And yet, one, people buy it. And two, he still keeps doing it. Just stop. I thought you wanted to keep your identity a secret.
And this book actively is trying to tell you, and this is one of those problems we talk about with informed traits versus traits the reader can see. The informed trait is that Dalen is very heckin' smartest boy in school. But these kinds of moments make you go, are you the dumbest boy in school, you fucking nightmare? Please let this end. And then he'll be like, well, let me think about how to use my powers. And so it's crazy because the book goes into such detail about how, you know, Dalen can think his way through to learning all of these cool power stuff. And there's a point later in the book where a character's like, oh my God, how did you figure that all by yourself? And he's like, smartest boy in school. You know, like, and then he just does this over, he calls people child, kid, little snot so much coming out the mouth of a 17-year-old. Like, are you an idiot? And you as the reader spend so much of this book going, can you, because he keeps going, oh, I shouldn't do that, I'm actually quite young.
Yes, that's the thing.
He keeps forgetting well past the point where he should have been not forgetting.
He also makes no attempt to hide his knowledge at any point. So all the characters around him are just supposed to accept that this 17-year-old is the highest form of highest swordsman, knows all about magic, knows all about technology, knows all this stuff about society at various points. And, like, they're always just like, oh, how do you know this stuff? And he's always like, you wouldn't know, and my past is my past. And it's like, this is beyond...
Lazy?
It's beyond lazy, yeah. And again, it's the thing where it's like, Dalen is actually really dumb.
Yes.
And the book doesn't want to tell you that.
Because there's only so much you can learn in 17 years, you know? Because for a portion of those 17 years, you're, like, not the greatest at learning things. Like, there's at least 4 years where it's a wash. You're not getting much out of it.
It would have made so much more sense if he kept, like, you know, his knowledge about society as well as his super badass sword skills all to himself. One, so that way he has the upper hand in certain situations. You know, like, that would be the smart move. You know, we all know, for our anime lovers, free Ren, till the end of time, or Journey's End, excuse me, that, like, you pretend not to be as powerful as you are to get the upper hand. That's the smart thing to do. But also, like, we started with him being a tinkerer. That seemed important. That was very much emphasized. And also, why do we always have to be little tinkerers? Why? Anyway, sorry, we've only really read one other book where that happens. But anyway, like, why didn't he just say, yeah, I went to an engineering school, or yeah, I have my dad's proficiency in mathematics. My brain works really well with that. Like, that's an easy out. And that way you can utilize that information and hide everything. I don't know. There's just so many mechanics in the story where it's just like, why didn't you just do that? That makes so much more sense.
One of the thoughts I had, and I don't think it would have actually worked, is I kind of thought it would have been interesting if, when becoming young, he lost his memories. And as the story goes on, he was like, he knew how, like, and people were like, why the fuck do you know that? And he was like, I have no fucking clue, but I actually know how to adjust the Darkstone on the interior of the ship. And it is not only his quest to figure out who he is, but coming closer and closer, and him dealing with the dread of, oh my God, I think this is it. And then, because there's a point where he relives his entire life in excruciating detail for 16 seconds.
and then he sweats blood.
That would have been way more interesting if that was the moment where all of his memories returned to him and he realized who he was, and, you know, like, shock and horror. And then the people he become friends with were like, oh no, but you were this person and you didn't have the memories, and like.
But also, what an interesting topic. There's two things there, right? It's like we have to deal with the concept that, like, one, he was a different like, if he had forgotten everything and it was a wipe, it was the beginning all over again, then he would have been a brand new person in a way. There's like a lot of movies where there's been amnesia and stuff like that. And that's always been a very interesting concept to me, is that you can be a completely new person by like restarting your brain, and yet how do you deal with the fallout of the past self and all those things you did? Not to mention, that would make so much more sense with his sickening dread within himself, and also make more sense why he's so haughty towards other people if he doesn't know who he is.
It also would give us a moment, like maybe he was choosing, like maybe he hadn't for the past 20 years realized he was wrong and had that moment. And actually killed himself, so he didn't have to, like, it was his last, fuck you, he was going to kill himself.
Go out on his own terms.
And then through this, losing his memory, and then through living as this, without his memories, realizing what he was, getting back those memories, and having to come to terms with it. And then we get that scene. Remember I said at the start of all of this how we can't have the scene where the guy realizes that he was an absolute fucking shitty person and reckoning with his entire life off screen before the book starts? What a way to do it. Anyway, that's not what happens. We're not going to speculate because we're still so far early in the book. Anyway, he's telling Aric, yeah, I'm the Tinkerer's son, and Aric is like, oh yeah, I met that guy going this way. Also, I'm here for you. The light told me I needed to come and accompany you. And Aric,
you were naked in my dream.
Yes, you were naked. Why we mentioned that, no idea. But anyway, and then he's like, wow, if the light has given me a light bringer to take me wherever I need to go, maybe this is the light's way of monitoring me and making sure I'm actually good. And he's like, I can't just tell the light to go fuck off. Obviously they put him here, so I guess he has to come with me. And then they walk into the house, and the guy who took Dalen to the place so he could kill himself, the country bumpkin, is there reading the letter that he wrote, confessing everything. I am Dallas the Conqueror. I've been here for the past 20 years, living in my guilt. Here is a book of my life and all of my crimes. I have killed myself. Begone, thoughts. Like,
yeah,
that is very the vibe.
Yes, it is, because we get an excerpt from it at the beginning, and when we started, he was very God, like gross car salesman confidence vibes, and then
that's such a good description of Dalen.
Yes, it's so strange. And then somehow he's not that though. Anyway, continue.
And so the country bumpkin is like, oh God, he lived here for 20 years amongst us and we didn't even know. The blackened bastard. Also, blackened is the worst, and black is the worst, curse word you could say.
So basically, Aric is like, oh wait, you're the, what is going on here? And Dalen is like, JK, I am the Conqueror's son, and he just died, and everyone needs to believe me. And Aric is like, well, you are, I guess I have to believe you. I don't really remember why. It's really stupid.
Everyone is like, oh yeah, because nobody is like, oh yes, he would have turned young. So he was just like, yeah, I was with him when he died, when he jumped off and he's gone, and I hated the blackened bastard. And everybody's like, yeah, we hate him too. We believe you hate him, and you were there, so we believe that. And also because he has a strong inner light, so everybody's like.
Country bumpkin guy goes off to tell the press. So Dalen goes into his cash supply and gets already so when I play online games, I'm one of those people that spends, not anymore, but I used to be one of those people that used to go buy all the leveled up gear, and so that way I could look pretty and super cool. That's what Dalen does. Dalen gets already leveled up gear out of his treasure chest, literally a chest, and he puts on an old fashioned red leather thing, and it looks super old, but super
suit.
Exactly, but it's super hot.
It's classic. It doesn't look outdated by 30 years.
And it's not moth-eaten, and it's his own size that he wore when he... Anyway, we're not going to go there.
Remember for a moment here that the premise of this story and the defense people will use is that Dalen is a conflicted character who you're supposed to feel conflicted about. Why does he get sexy clothes and the coolest sword ever that, Because he gets like a wooden sword that's not wood and now has light and it can cut through anything, and its name is Imperious.
No, okay, no. Let's go into detail.
And it's blue.
Yeah, let's go into detail a little bit about this. Okay, so first of all, he smithed his sword, and it is a masterpiece, unlike any other. It has told us many times.
It is
made out of
sunsmith.
It is made out of a special wood that's the sharpest material ever, but it's wood. However, he made it into something called a sunicle, which is actually a fun word. But he made it into a sunicle, which is a light-infused thing. So anyway, he gets his super cool sword Imperious. He gets his super hot red leather jacket. And he also gets this really cool gauntlet that's illegal because it has darkstone shards in it. And it's like, pew, pew.
And it has a dagger in it as well.
And so he looks super badass. And instead of hiding the sword, because Auric's like, you should probably hide that sword. It's because that is very well known as your father's, which once again, how does everybody know what the sword looks like at this point? It's been a very long time.
Sunforged weapons have to be linked to their users by blood, which means when either the sword breaks or the user dies, the other thing has a similar response. So if you die, the weapon breaks. If the weapon breaks, you die or you are very, very injured. There is a bond. So much of a bond that, like, if somebody is holding your weapon far, like, on the other side of a room, and you, like, call it to you, it'll fly to you, a la Rey calling a lightsaber to her.
Wait a second. I really like this comment. I'm so sorry. Paid content. He got a pre-bundle order.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, he shelled out for the DLC.
When they find Imperious, Aric, a smart man who was alive because he looks like he's in his 40s, which means he's been alive pre the end of Dalen's reign. He's like, shouldn't Imperious be, like, shattered? And Dalen's like, actually, the bond transferred over to me. And there was no damage to the sword. And Aric's like, well, like, I guess so. I don't know that much about sunsmithing. And Dalen's like, believe it. And just, like, has all this knowledge about sunforging. And Aric is like, wow, you know a lot about this stuff. The other thing is, Imperious is not just any sunforged weapon, because sunforged weapons have a terrible flaw within them, which is if they touch darkstone, they shatter into a bajillion pieces. And so even though sunforged armor, super cool, really awesome, if you're touched with darkstone, which there is, like, everywhere, it's not like it's not like a rare thing. Everyone has darkstone, easily available. If it's touched by darkstone, it'll shatter, which makes sunforged armor a terrible idea.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Dalen, back in the day, figured out how to make a sunforged weapon and armor, though we don't see the armor, that is not shattered by darkstone. He figured out how to make the perfectest, most flawless sunstone, and the book never tells you how, really. Like, it's just like,
he's
wow.
just a genius. It really is Tony Stark rules. It's really funny because he also created, like, these annihilator warships that are basically like city destroyers, and he was super cool. And he also made this other engine run better, and, like, he has secret caches of technology all throughout the world. And it's again, the book is just actively filleting him a massive amount.
It is around this time that I must talk about our other point of view character, because it's at around a third of the way through the book that she finally gets a POV chapter, and that is Lyra. Lyra is an arch knight, which are light binders versus light bringers.
Light binders are basically just Jedi in a Jedi order who go around doing justice things and fighting the shades.
The light binders can bind light to them. They can draw light in, bind it to them in different ways to get powers. Light bringers can create light, exude light, do light shots. Like they can go pew pew with light. And they can also create stuff with light.
Lyra, in specific, she is, it's funny because the book is like, she's middle-aged but hot. Don't worry, she kept herself together. Yeah, she's just like the dumbest. Lyra is going to be on a quest for, like, a bunch of chapters to catch Dalen, and eventually she does, because the whole thing is like, well, if he got his powers without swearing himself to the light, that could be really destabilizing, because everybody thinks you have to be a good person to get the light. Basically, her backstory is she was one of the 14-year-olds that Dalen S8
multiple times.
And she now gets very anxious when she thinks about sex of any kind. Okay. Lyra, to me, is such an utterly disgusting way of writing a character. So first of all, yes, people who suffer from trauma get triggered. This is a thing that happens. But Lyra's emotional fallout from being SA'd is written in such a infantilizing way to her character. This is not, again, this book really struggles with interiority and complex emotional thoughts. Lyra is treated as like, here at, however old she is, middle age, she has the same emotional, she cannot even think about sex. She almost has a panic attack. She just breathes through it and is like, oh, I can't even think about it. And the thing is, like, again, people who have gone through trauma like that, they grow. They grow over time. It doesn't ever really go away, but they are people in their own right, and they can process that trauma and grow past it. And it's not like it's not like she's a no one. She's like a really cool night lady person.
Again, as Will said at the beginning of all this author is trying to tackle incredibly complex subjects, and he's just not capable of doing it well. It's because what we, for example, by comparison, could have done with Lyra is, so Lyra has been assaulted. Lyra might have certain things that happen in very hyper-specific situations where she might doubt herself, or where she might feel out of control because it's a control issue. So maybe she has certain things where we're controlling, right? Or maybe it doesn't have to be as on the nose as oh, let's say she has OCD. No, not like that necessarily, but certain control factors. And we could have depicted that with her partner, oh, I just had his name in my head. So we could have shown the control thing. We could have shown maybe certain instances where certain male characters or even female characters had a controlling behavior and she reacted in some way to this, or she felt trapped in certain areas. And then when she actually sees Dalen for the first time and hears his voice, and it's not just that he looks like Dalen and sounds like Dalen, but also specifically the way he speaks is like Dalen. And then maybe we can start having her spiral a little bit, because yes, that would be very triggering if it was the very person that you thought was dead or gone or something like that, or at the very least shock. And also she very easily gets over her, she has a PTSD attack at some point, and it is babyfied so hard on how she gets over it that it makes it seem like trauma is an on and off switch.
You're completely right, both of you, in the sense that when she's actually dealing with the actual thing that looks and feels like the cause of her trauma, it is dealt with very easily. And yet the book simultaneously wants you to believe that 20 years post any of this, that she still cannot hear about other people having sex without having panic attacks. That's the level of, and here's the thing. The way people process trauma is incredibly specific to the person, and one of the things we're going to talk about is some people come through sexual trauma and end up being hypersexual. That's the way of processing it. That happens. You have the people who go in the opposite direction. There's a ton of different ways, but unfortunately, by presenting this middle-aged, very capable woman who is able to be completely crippled by a man talking about getting an erection, is just a wild thing.
How did she get through training? She's surrounded by most men, I think. There weren't any other archknights that were women. So, and if there were, certainly got past me, and they weren't important. So how did she do this, being surrounded by a whole bunch of jocks, basically?
And also just, being around humans, it comes up. We have innuendo. There's a lot of ways in which that kind of stuff comes up, and people are not in the Middle Ages and stuff. No, I'm sorry. People have been making innuendo sex jokes. It's a thing that it's, as Nemorales says, sex jokes are timeless. Indeed, they are. And so to have a character who has built up no skin at all, it would be one thing if we heard that the first 4 years post she really struggled with this stuff, but since then had to armor herself, and she has a really, like, she's built a really solid shell, and she's kind of stone-faced about it, like, those kinds of things get no reaction out of her at all. But it just, Will's right, it feels very infantilizing, because for the most part, she's sold to you as like a capable boss woman.
She's a badass. She's literally a badass.
And her partner that she's paired with is Chirasian. His name is Cuseg. And he is that group of people that we mentioned that Dalen was really surprised that Aric, who's also Chirasian, is fully clothed, because the Chirasians generally walk around naked with, like, jewelry.
So much I don't want to say, but could be said on this.
Okay, so here's the problem with it. This is going to, and you might, so we're going to talk about his views, both because they're really stupid and funny, but also because they kind of speak to a deeper problem with how the book views sex and advocates about sex, is that in Shirasian culture, they're all naked all the time because it is a weakness to have sex out of marriage. And so they're constantly trying to test each other about this. And that gets to an idea that the book has, that sexual interest is a weakness, and it's also a bit of like a slut-shamey feel almost, because it's like sex is a thing that you have to hold off if it's not in marriage, and it'll make you do bad things, and that is going to play into one of the most harmful stereotypes about SA, which this book also indulges in, which is that it is a thing that comes about because of sexual attraction or sexual energy, and that's not what SA is. SA is about power, primarily. And so by spreading this kind of an idea, I mean, it makes sense. Shad is a Mormon. Like, that's just what's up.
I didn't know he was Mormon.
Oh my god!
That's why Lindbergh said matriology was kind of more. That makes so much more sense.
Mm-hmm, yeah, he's Mormon, and it's so obvious in the book once you realize that. But again, it's this idea of sex as like a thing that is corrupting, and it is the reason people do bad things. It's kind of like the view that, like, the reason that rape happens is because of pornography. Pornography is a stepping stone, like marijuana is to harder drugs towards this thing. And that's just extremely harmful because it's just not factual. It's not factual, and it makes people think about sex and assault in ways that are counterproductive in the real world. This kind of gets back a little bit to what I was talking about how, back at the beginning, that Dalen's perspective on all of the assault he did is the one that the book privileges and brings to the front. It is his pain at these things that happened to people who are unnamed, the unnamed masses. He killed 17 million people. You don't feel that in this book because you weren't in the people who died point of view. Even Lyra, which we'll talk about, basically she doesn't. We'll talk about it a little bit more because she's more. It's a little more complex how he kind of shifts blame off of there. But the point is that we are focused on his pain throughout the book. He is the main narrative, and instead of focusing on the pain of the person who was the victim. And the problem with this is that it trains us unconsciously to, when in the real world something bad happens, we identify immediately with the person who did the bad thing. The guy on the campus does this thing, the judge gets dozens of letters about, like, oh, he has such a bright future, he did this bad thing, we don't want this bad thing to ruin his life, and you put into your brain, you're like, oh man, what if I had done something like this, how bad would I feel about it? When it's not about that. It should be about the victim's experience and how they grow and they go through it. And that's the thing. Lyra is infantilized and objectified in that she is just there as a token of what bad things he did. It's not a story about what she went through, how it affected her, how she grew from it, the book's not telling you themes through that.
Thank you, William.
And this connects with the problem with Aric as a character because it's exactly the same. So much of this book does not feel like an actual plot that we're going through. It feels like chosen ways to add to Dalen, to exonerate and to make him look good. Aric exists to be the book's moral compass that lets you know that Dalen is actually now a heckin' good boy. And we also eventually find out that Aric is actually someone that was directly impacted by Dalis the Conqueror. Dalis killed his wife and children.
Yeah.
Previously, and this is also the man, I'm just going to spoil it now, Aric is the man who led the rebellion that eventually deposed old Dalis the Conqueror. So this guy specifically hates, and the book isn't actually interested with Aric's experiences, Aric's feelings, but the idea that the only way forward from paths of revenge and retributive justice is forgiveness. And he doesn't feel like a character in his own right. He feels like a tool to further Dalen. And Lyra feels like that. Zane feels like that. The only character in this book who did not function that way was Cusack. Do you want to know who died? Cusack!
Oh my god, off screen. He was built up, he was characterized, he was given a private scene. He was given a perspective. And yet he is killed off screen for no reason whatsoever.
Yep. He's the only character who had something where his thing was about someone else other than Dalen. It is insane to me, but every other main character is literally there to be like, Dalen's great. I do want to talk about the Churasian naked thing because like Will mentioned, the reason, because there's this book has a lot of logical fallacies with how it's presenting its world. Like people's inner light, Lindbergh talks about it as like the first and the greatest of the logical fallacies, and we'll get to that during the point in which it's explained where it's going to come. But this is the part where we learn more about, or Cusack's the character that we learn more about the reason why Churasian people are naked all the time, and it's because, as Will said, you're supposed to master your body, because if you have sex, like, if you have sex because you just want to have sex with someone, that is a heckin' no-no. And so people are naked to challenge each other, because the most, as a man, the most shameful thing you can do is have an erection in front of other people because you're not in control of your body. But the other thing that the book also tells you about Churasians, because Ben brought this up, also, if everyone were naked all the time, wouldn't people just stop seeing nudity as inherently sexual? Yes. Yes, they would. There's even a point where Cusack goes...
It says it.
Cusack's like, I think that's why your people... because you cover up...
rape. Fucking hell, I forgot about that.
Yeah, no,
yes.
Don't worry. Oh, I didn't forget. He's like, because you cover it and you make it this prized thing, this unveiling, people want to then take it. And thus, we don't have this over here because we're just naked all the time. So, on one hand, it's telling you that people are naked because the body is a sexual thing and you have to master your body to keep from having a response to this sexual object. And then, with the other hand, it's also going to tell you that actually we don't see bodies as sexual because we're just naked all the time, and we don't see that as a thing you have to unwrap. So what is it? Is the body a sexual thing that you have to unveil all the time to show that you are mentally powerful enough to command your body not to have reactions to naked people? Or do you not see the body as a sexual thing because you are naked all the time and thus it holds no power? It's one or the other. You cannot have both. Sorry, I'm done now.
That was an excellent soapbox. I appreciated it. The next big thing that happens is basically, oh god, we even forgot to, oh god. We
got introduced to Lyra and Cusack. They're doing their stuff. But one of the things that happens immediately after this is Dalen wants to go to the capital, but to get there they have to go through this other city and get a skyship. While they're waiting for their skyship, Dalen is like, I'm going to do good. And he uses his extra hearing, his extra hearing skills, and he hears people calling for help. And this is his Batman moment where he's like, I shall answer all the calls for help.
It's the Dark Knight moment of like, oh, he can hear all the cell phones.
Dalen's whole journey is to get to the capital. Why is he wanting to go to the capital? He wants to get something of his own. He wants to get something of his own belongings from before. It's not really like fully elaborated on, is it?
And yet, it's actually the dumbest thing. He needs to get rid of the records and forge his records. So if anybody looks into his backstory, there's evidence. It is the smallest throwaway line.
And also, like, first of all, if that mattered, all the choices he makes later on to therefore prolong his journey to get to that capital negates that whole insistence to go do that.
Yep.
He also just doesn't give a fuck once he's there. He's like, oh, whoopsie, guess I was late. And so there's really no point. This is all waffling, constantly waffling.
It is. I also have to mention that before he met up with Aric, he did he was sleeping in an alley. A beggar came and tried to slit his throat, and he beheaded the beggar and then pinned the beggar's head to a wall. He then sleeps on roofs and then falls off a roof, and people see him do magic.
The other important part is that he has a moment after he violently kills this beggar who was gonna mug him or whatever, and is like, oh no, what, am I gonna become the Conqueror again? What if, now that I even have more powers? And he's like, no, what if I just kept it personal scale, not trying to control anybody else? Okay, I'm okay now. This is my new moral code. Bear in mind, this is like the only, like, the way it's so perfunctory how it comes out. Like, the way I described it is as perfunctory as it is in the book, which, like, A leads to B leads to C. And also he decides, okay, my worth in life is I have a lot of killing skills, so I'm gonna just kill people. That's gonna be my thing. I'm gonna kill bad people, which is just such a dumb view of justice.
He's an engineer.
You couldn't use your powers for any, like, it would be so... It would have been really interesting if Aric's goal was not, don't just kill people, use your skills for adding good to the world in other ways. Like, there's something to be said for the idea of, as part of a retribution, using your powers but not killing, a la Rurouni Kenshin, where you have a character who killed for years for other people, and then in his quest to protect people is trying to use his sword as a protection and not a killing instrument. And even in instances where it would be beneficial to just kill the person, he doesn't. And in some cases, those people he doesn't kill end up, like, redeeming themselves. They've come out of their bad situation. They become good people. And he also just, like, turns bad people over to the law. And if the book had tried to take that no. The book is going to embrace I shall, on a person-to-person level, dispense my judgment and kill them.
He falls off a roof. People are like, what are you doing? You have light powers. And he's like, I'm a light bringer. And they're like, okay, we are like, whatever the one is.
Archknight.
The Jedi. I'm a Jedi.
I'm an Archknight in disguise.
And that's why Lyra has been following him around from that thing. Also, so at this point, him and Aric decide, okay, fast forwarding back to the part, him and Aric decide, we're going to go to the capital on a sky ship. And this, no. You're right.
While waiting
he
for the
decides
sky
to murder
ship,
a bunch of people, Batman style.
There's a point where they're in a restaurant and people are looking at him and they're like, oh, that's Dallas the Conqueror's son, because everybody now knows who he is. And he's like, I can't be here. And then he's like, I shall become Batman. And he goes and he Batmans and he kills a guy raping his daughter. Just wild stuff.
No. He kills the guy. He throws him out, and the girl's like, what'd you do? They're all gonna blame me. And he's, like, so cold-shouldered about it. Just like, bitch, whatever. No idea that, like, maybe that was the only, she needed her father for economic reasons. Any of the many, many reasons abused people have to stay in abusive situations are taken into account.
If he really wanted, like, okay, look, if he's still gonna be, like, a gross, disgusting butcher of people, he could have, at the very least, just chopped off the dude's hands or chopped off his, like, or gave him, like, I don't know.
He literally, oh good lord, he rips off.
But just leave it at that. He overkills everyone. He
ripped off the guy's so his penetrative graping days were over. Now there are other ways to essay people, but anyway, the point is he goes on a spree. Also, this book refuses to call a woman who was essaying a young boy a rapist. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
No, I did.
I thought that was weird.
It is weird. It is wild thing to not specifically, like, because there's a point where he lists a bunch of things, and then that woman didn't grape this. She was just essaying, like, and says it that way. It's real weird. But anyway, and he just murderers, people, and then there was eventually Aric comes with him at some point, finds him, and then there's this one guy, and they're like, nah, you just were going to rob us, but you didn't, so we'll let you go. And it's insane because at no point Because at one point, Aric is like, why are you just killing all of these people? Turn them over. And he's like, no, I have this one obscure law that I actually put in place like 30 years ago, where if you catch someone doing it, you're good. You can just kill them right then and there, or enact whatever punishment they should have had. And there were some people that he did turn over, like he like just knocked them out and then turned them over. But he just... Again, a lot of the things that he caught people doing are things that he himself has done, and that he is now, like, the book is going to really hard try to convince you that actually he's good now and he deserves to live and continue doing good. But every person he kills for their crimes is denied this opportunity. So this book ends being like,
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness, reintegration, restorative justice, and completely ignores this entire period where he's not even Batmaning in the Batman, like, Batman doesn't kill people sense, but like Batmaning plus killing.
And the next big add-on to this that we have to explain is they get onto the ship and they're gonna try to get to the place, but they get stopped by pirates. And before the pirates get there, Dalen's like, all right, I'm gonna kill them all. And Aric is like, oh, you don't necessarily know which of them are bad, though. You can't kill them all. And Dalen's like, well, they're working as pirates. And Aric goes, okay, but everybody inside them has a certain amount of light. And the light is how the book is going to justify his hyper-violent Batman ways. And this gets to the core idea of justice in this book and goodness and redemption that we were just talking about. Basically, light is if you're a good person, or if you feel like you're a good person and have a strong sense of justice.
Confidence.
Okay, that's the thing, is that the book tries to tell you at first it's not exactly a sense of good or not goodness.
Because Daedalus the Conqueror always had a massive amount of inner light.
Yeah, so it's almost more like a counter of, like, good motivation. But the thing is, the book doesn't actually treat it like that afterwards. It will treat it like that for a minute, and it also just doesn't make sense because everybody thinks they're doing good things. But that's the thing. That's the fundamentalist view of this book, is that there are good people, and and sometimes they will do bad things, but they can be redeemed. And those are the people with light in them. Like Dalen, like that one mugger who was just doing it because he was poor. I guess all the other criminals they ran into weren't doing it because it was poor. This is a deeply conservative mind view that crime is caused by moral weakness, not by material conditions and as an outgrowth of poverty. And it's just wrong. I don't really want to feel like arguing it here. Look up some basic theories. I'm sorry, conservatives have the problem that their worldview just doesn't conform with reality. The book is, the good people with the good motivations. Obviously, bad people know they're being bad, which again is fucking bizarre. Nobody thinks they're the bad guy in their head.
He's on a ship with Aric to go to the capital, but then they have their side quest where there are pirates, and the pirates come and Dalen annihilates them, and as he annihilates them, he finds a young man who has extra light than anybody else in him, and so he saves him. And anyway, so as you can imagine, he becomes like, under his wing type of thing. He's the nice kid that just had bad circumstances type of thing again. And again, the obsession, and this is where it really starts getting super obsessed with SA. Because Dalen finds out that the ship that he was on was actually human trafficking a whole bunch of young girls for that purpose and for slavery and such. And so he kills all of the crew again.
As sex slaves.
And so he kills all of the crew again. During this process also, we find out something very strange that literally has no purpose throughout the rest of the book, except for to maybe indicate one little baby thing. And it could have easily been, like, that's so nonsense. It's that Blackheart, right? The
Captain
is that what
of
his
the
name?
Pirates, yes.
Yes.
Blackheart is not the guy who was doing the human trafficking. The boat that they were on was doing the human trafficking. Blackheart is just the pirate that was attacking.
Blackheart is one-on-oneing. He's a sub-boss with Dalen. And as they're fighting, Dalen is told by him, hey, wait a second. I'm the son of Daedalus the Conqueror.
Yeah, and you look like you're the son of Daedalus the Conqueror. We're brothers.
And then Dalen's thinking, No way. That can't ever be possible. First of all, yes, it could. Come on now, dude. You literally said, anyway, that's neither here nor there. So anyway, he ends up finding out, oh, wait a second. My advisors lied to me and the contraceptives that we had didn't actually work. And I have maybe a whole bunch of different children that were just smuggled away. What purpose does this serve? Why are there children in this universe? I don't understand why that is specifically pointed out and then never used at all.
Okay, so here's the thing. That is a good point. What purpose does Dalen having children serve? And often, and in the book from this point on, he will think about it and he'll be like, was there any goodness in me? I would love to meet I would like to meet these children and know like what they are like now. It's treated like this is like almost like a legacy for him. It's really important.
I thought the plot was going to then be he goes and looks for his bastard children.
Yes!
And tries to take care of them.
You silly, silly woman.
You know.
So, no, the thing about it is you gotta bear in mind that the author thinks having children is a metaphysical act that is, it is healing for women to, and we'll talk about this more later, to bear a child and be a woman. That is their greatest life.
Oh my god, it literally says this verbatim, basically.
We don't want to spoil it, because that was in the last 16 minutes of the book. You just got that gut punch of his beliefs. And so, because again, it actually serves no role in the book past this point, his children being there. And, you know, we talked about, me and Maria read Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, a book I like significantly more now. And one of the things we talked about there is the whole difference between someone being biologically your child and being socially your child. You know, the difference between a mother who, you know, is a surrogate versus a mother who is a stepmother. One of those, yes, is biologically a mother, but we would never say the stepmother is not a mother in that way. But that's not how Shad sees it. Shad sees her as being some kind of metaphysical link between child and parent. And so that's why that's in this book and why he keeps thinking about it, because that is important to Shad, but he never actually goes through the work of justifying that in world. It's not even like his bullshitty light concept, which is metaphysically in the world and reflects what he thinks of the real world. It's just a weird aside he keeps thinking about.
Lindbergh makes the point Dalen's view of his children is entirely narcissistic. He considers them a lesser part of himself.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, if they are good, then that means there was a part of him that was good.
Yes.
And which is just wild. The other thing we have to say about this is during this fight, because we have to explain this. He's having this fight and the guy's like, oh, you look just like him. I didn't think I'd find another one of us. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Fighting. And then towards the end, he's like, no, we're both the bastard's children. And he's like, no, it's impossible. And he was like, yeah, my mother was one of, and he was like, and again, in his head, he's like, I told my advisors to make sure none of the women had children and they took precautions. Like, anyway, and this guy is a super great, not great guy. He's done murderings, he's done thieverings,
Dalen doesn't really know this. It should be pointed out. He doesn't even know he's a famous pirate. He just kind of knows he's a pirate.
He's also just decided that this guy's a terrible guy. And partially because the one thing you find out, Dalen destroys one of this guy's sonicles, which is those weapons, and it's his shield. It's a light forged weapon, shield, armor. It's just a light forged item. And he destroys it, and then Blackheart himself doesn't die, and he's like, what? Because whoever it's tied to is supposed to be hurt when you destroy it, and he's like, ha ha ha, none of my sonicles are actually bonded to me. It was bonded to a senator's daughter that I was holding hostage to keep her father in line. And this gives Dalen everything he needs to know to destroy this man. And he kills him in the most wild, barbaric. He basically Vlad the Impalers them, if you're familiar with that, but specifically
through the butt,
like
penetrative.
And he doesn't. It doesn't even kill him. He's like, oh, it will kill him slowly, and you know the agony of it as he does this, and you're like, what the fuck, my dude?
And then he's like, at the last moment, he's like, I am Dallas, which he does multiple times. And I'm like,
why do you keep doing this?
Because he's a narcissist.
Yes,
he just keeps over and over again.
But not just this. As the guy's like, when he's like, I'm Dallas the Conqueror, he's like, then I'm not your brother, I'm your son. And this guy is telling him, and Dalen's like, I don't hear you. I'm not paying attention. He does this. He ends up doing the same thing to the captain of the ship that him and Aric had hired because they were doing the human trafficking of the young girls and raping them. And he just puts them next to each other so they can die slowly together. And so he doesn't just kill Blackheart that way and is like, that was a once-off. I don't know what came into me. He does it twice, okay? And then everybody else, when they're talking about it, and they were like, yeah, Blackheart was the son of Daedalus the Conqueror. And everyone was like, he's like, nah, Daedalus never had any other children. I was the only one.
And we're gonna find out later when he goes to the pirate's lair that, like, he's like, oh, he was telling the truth. I have so many children. And this is like a gut punch to him, and he feels real bad about it. But again, this goes back to, like, why is him having children so much, like, he killed 17 million people. Like, why is that the thing that gives him a gut punch?
28 million.
I thought it was 17.
28. Just to finish the scene, and it's only when everybody else points out to him, like, hey, those things probably didn't actually work perfectly, that he actually, for a second, thinks. And also, Blackheart looked like him, okay? This is how dumb this man is, okay? This man who is sold to us as super, super, super smart and excellent perception, okay? He looks at this guy who looks like him, who says, I am your son. Nope, zero belief. The minute two other random people, Aric and Zane, are like, actually, that's probably, because it probably could be true. He's like, oh my god, you're right, it might actually be true. I'm sorry. Meeting someone who looked like you and who was like, I am Daedalus the Conqueror's son, you didn't pause for a second, but the minute two randos who would know more or less than you are like, actually, that's what he said. And now you're like, oh yeah, actually, maybe that is true.
We'll get back to the grape stuff in a moment, but he also, during this, realizes one of the pirates is a good person and has a lot of inner light. So he saves that guy. This kid is, I don't remember his name. He's going to become a minor character.
Zane.
The story behind Zane that he finds out later is that Zane grew up in a real bad neighborhood, and so he had to become a pirate, and he was being blackmailed into being a pirate by the way that Blackheart. And the thing is that this goes back to what I was saying before. It's not apparently that the other pirates had difficult living situations, and that's why they turned to piracy. Apparently they were just like, piracy.
I'm the evilest.
In the book's worldview, there are bad people, and when they commit crimes, they should be brutally murdered. And when good people commit bad crimes, well, we can rehabilitate them.
They end up going, because they're like, this book is such a weird collection of things, because, like, the actual plot, like, there is no actual plot. It's like a bunch of little mini episodes that are all connected. Because this is the part where they're like, oh, Blackheart kept all of the people he was using as hostages in his hideout. So we have to go and we have to free them. Let's go. So they go to Blackheart's hideout. While this is happening, Lyra and Cusack are having a lot of cultural misunderstandings. They end up going to the village where Dalen was hiding, and they're doing a bunch of stuff in the background. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so they go to the hideout, and while they're on their way to the hideout, this is where we learned some stuff. Okay? This is about to start the period where I literally saw Lindbergh's brain break in real time. I was about half an hour ahead of Lindbergh as this was happening, and so I got to, like, I was having a reaction, and then half an hour later Lindbergh would have it, and it was just great.
The thing about this book is the first half of the book is very dull, and you're like, this is not good, but it's a certain level of not good. And then the death sodomy starts a new level of bad in this book, of just what the fuckery, where the author could not keep down his weird views and ideas about the world, and just some of the plot things that happen are wild.
After the Vlad the Impaler stuff and they've decided to do this thing, we get a whole, like, half an hour of Darkstone physics, and he teaches Zane about Darkstone physics, and then there's a point where Zane can extrapolate enough to make a really, like, if you knew the stuff, it would be a simple inference, but Zane somehow, like, I don't know, like, and that's how him and Zane begin to bond, is he's teaching him stuff that he was never taught before. And then he goes to his room, And one of the girls, what's happening is a lot of the girls
God.
on the ship are like,
Oh,
oh my
God.
God, he's so attractive, and they keep looking at him. And Aric's like, you're the good-looking hero. They're like, look at you, buddy. And he's like, no, don't look at me. I'm not a hero.
This part made me squick so hard and fast. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm like, any tiny, there wasn't really any hope to begin with, but it's gone. And it's when Dalen goes in, pours himself some scotch. And he's hanging out there. Well, one of the young girls who, as
Shara.
Maria said, she comes in and she's like, oh, I don't know what to do with myself. I can't go back. I'll be seen as damaged goods. I'll never be able. I was already disliked. And then she's like, drops her clothes. And then she's like, please, I've already done it.
Let me stay with you.
Let me show you. And then he's just like, oh God, no. And then he turns around, right?
No.
At first.
No.
Yeah, no. Let me get there.
Yeah, go.
Let me get there, God damn it. So he turns around and he's like, oh no, I can't do this. This is horrible. And she's like, if you haven't done it before, I now know how. I can show you. And then he's like, oh, but she sounds so hot.
My 17-year-old body. I can't stop my cravings for young women. There's literally a part where he's like,
Yes.
his body betrayed him for his craving of the young woman.
Yes.
Flesh.
Yes. And he gets an erection. He turns around about ready to just give it all. And then, he realizes what he's doing, blah, blah, blah.
He literally is so disgusted he throws up.
And tells her, get out!
We figure out some of this now, some of this before, and some of this later. But, backstory time. He was married. Oh, we haven't even covered, okay. So, he became, his parents, we gotta rewind even farther. His parents died when there was a Shade attack during the 4th night. Him and a bunch of knights fought them off, but it was tragic. Afterwards, the people looked to him as a hero, but the aristocracy didn't like him, so they tried to kill him. So, he killed all of them.
His wife and children.
His
died.
wife and children, who he never fucking thinks about throughout this entire fucking book, tragically died.
And he names his wife once, and I think his kids once. And that's it. He never thinks about them again by their names. It is just a weird, anyway, continue.
It is insane. So basically, but the aristocracy, he saw one of the children staring at him and he was like, oh, there's going to be revenge at some point. A cycle of revenge. So he kills the child of the aristocracy. This is the part where he decides to do communism, by the way, and the system breaks down because once he made sure that everybody had equal living situations, some people were too lazy to do the work, and that's why the society stopped working. Utterly stupid on so many levels. I don't even necessarily think we have time to get into how much the author hates communism and how little sense it makes in this setting. Basically, at this point, he was like, oh, okay, but I'm horny, so I'm going to tell women to come here and, whatever.
Yeah.
And they're gonna think that, and the first girl who came, Dina or something like that, thought that I wanted to marry her, but I didn't. I just wanted her for sex.
I just wanted to boink her. Literally so gross. And he's actively thinking this. It's not even just, we get a lot of it in his little journal entries at the beginning of everything, but he also thinks back on this a lot. And it's just from here on out, like I said, it just becomes about sex constantly.
Yes. He brings the girls in and he lets them think that they're special and he's going to marry them up until the point where they get too invested. And once they get to the point where they're upset with him, he casts them aside. And at first, again, when other women don't know what's happening, they're like, okay, I get to potentially be the empress of this thing. And so at first they're coming willingly, but eventually it gets around that he's just using these women. And please note that this society still has a puritanical idea about sex and virginity. And he specifically said he wanted something innocent and unsoiled. Yes. So he was specifically asking for young virgins that he would use to however he wanted, and then cast them aside, eventually to the point where women start realizing that no, you're just being used this way. And so then people have to, his cabinet has to lie to the girls.
You forgot the part about how sometimes the women came back and like harassed him, so he kills any that return.
And they're like, and at one point he specifically says, the age of consent was 14, so at least I didn't go any lower than that. And I'm like,
God.
The age that you could get married was 14, and so he never went lower than that. Please note, at some of these points, he was like 60, you know, with a 14-year-old. It's gross. That was Lyra's fate. Our girl Lyra was 14 and he was in his 60s, okay? Anyway, and then he starts getting more and more depraved. He's not gentle, he's rough, and he ends up breaking some of the women to the point where in his mind, they're not good anymore, so he just put them out of their misery.
First of all, you forgot the worst thing he does. He makes them walk around naked, and sometimes he made them do stuff with each other. The foul perversion.
I just don't understand how at all you were supposed to follow this story once we're given all of this. Maybe at the beginning, when we just know him as the Conqueror, it's kind of undefined, or even if it were a little defined, if we didn't like linger on this obsession with sex and the need for sex and young, innocent, virgin blood, like maybe then I could have, and even then that's pushing it. But now at this point, yes, at this point, I just am like, he's so disgusting. I can't like him. And there's nothing about the message in this story that makes him even remotely like relatable.
So the thing is that usually the way to play this trope is even evil has standards. So like there was a book that was going around for a while called Haunting Adeline that everyone talked about how gross and terrible it is and stuff. And yes, whatever, it's a stalker romance. But the main character in it, he does a lot of terrible things, but at least he doesn't do things to children. And those are the people he hates most. Shad went, oh, actually, what if I just did that too? Like, I'll throughout the book keep treating it like doing stuff to children is the absolute worst thing, but then I'm gonna have my main character do it. He also doesn't commit to this, though, because Lyra never has, like, a traumatic flashback to what happened. We just get vague, he was a dark figure looming above her. I want to read one thing that Lindbergh wrote in her final thoughts. Her final thoughts are fantastic. If you are part of our Patreon, which if you haven't, go read it. Also, join our Patreon. Also, like and comment on this video. We should have said that before 2 hours into this, but whatever. But she says, the book is very concerned with women's innocence and the taking of that innocence. Grape is condemned, but I would like to direct some attention to the framing of grape as a concept. I would say grape is a violation of the person's right to bodily autonomy, an assault on their mind and body, a crime. The book, however, frames it as an act that steals a girl's innocence. So innocence is a commodity that can be taken away, leaving the woman or girl to exist without it. In other words, and reflected through the book's apathetic treatment of these despoiled women, grape is bad because it takes away something that is the right and property of the girl's husband. Once despoiled in it, she has less to offer him. This is rather clearly reflected in the sentiment Dalen expresses towards the women he himself raped and despoiled. He feels regret because they were worthy of his respect before he ruined them, versus the trafficked girl who tries to entice him sexually in order to earn a place at his side, towards which he expresses disgust. And I think that is the thing, is that and it happens a couple times. There's another empress who, like, he seduced and then betrayed because she thought he was going to marry her. And so, like, that's the way the book treats assault, is as, like, more of a thing, less of a crime against a person and more of a despoiling, almost, of,
Yes.
like...
Also, the book subtly implies that what he was doing is slightly better than people just jumping. Lindbergh made this point, it was a comment further up, but just jumping out of the bushes and holding a woman down to the ground. Like, there's those kinds of rapists, and then there's those who thought women were coming willingly, and when they cried in bed, he just chose to ignore it. I thought they were all coming willingly, and why were they crying?
But then he actively, like, addresses that fallacy within himself later on. So it's just, like, it's so messy. My God.
It's also worth pointing out that Lyra, like, one of the reasons she hates him is because she got rid of her womb afterwards to make sure she wouldn't have his child, and so she can't have children now. Oh, no! And it's kind of implied that's one of the reasons.
She never voices wanting to have children. This is not a thing. She's an arch knight. So why does she, like, why is that mentioned?
Well, because he's morbid.
It's wild. Anyway, so that's this part of the book where we kind of learn all of this stuff. While this is happening, him and Zane are, like, becoming friendly. The girls keep looking at him, and he's like, no, don't look at me. Then they get to the pirate hideout, and he goes in, and he puts his bonds to perception and is able to perceive things that he didn't know before, and that's not how perception works. But anyway, and he basically learns that Blackheart was selling taking the ships he was getting and selling them to other people. And they were like, why was he doing that? And it's all the same people, and it looks like he was selling it to the, what are they called?
Daunists.
The Daunists. The Daunists are a group of people who want the Dawn Emperor, the Dawn Empire to come back. They were like, those were the good days. These are the bad days. Bring back Daelus the Conqueror. But the Daunists are the ones buying all these boats, and they're like, that's really weird. What are they doing with them? Nobody's seeing them. He also, this is where he finds out that Blackheart was actually his son, and he's like, oh my god, what a terrible thing. I didn't even give him the opportunity. I'm responsible for him. I didn't give him the opportunity for anything, and I just killed him brutally. And what if I have other children? Anyway, so then they go to the capital. At this point, Lyra and Cusack are also waiting for them at the capital, and they've kind of gone ahead, and they're like, make sure you bring him here. So when they land in the capital, Dalen is like, Zane, you get to have Blackheart's ship and all of the riches on it. And Zane's like, what, sir? I don't deserve that. And he's like, no, buddy, you go build your life. You live a better life. You had a lot of light.
He says to Zane, go get a girl pregnant. Make a family.
Not, get married, have a family.
A 17-year-old saying that to another 17-year-old is wild.
By the way, the girl who was traumatized and was offering him sex is now like Zane's girl, and the whole thing is kind of like she felt like despoiled and she doesn't know what to do next. So like it's kind of weird that like that's the direction he took it, but whatever. And so at this point, you might be thinking, oh, he's gonna get trapped by the Archknights because you guys don't know this, but the Archknights had set a trap for him to when he comes in on the boat, the airship. But no, those idiots, he sees it coming. And so when Lyra and Cusack show up, they like battle for a while. And even though they have powers he didn't know about, he escapes because he's so cool. And this is what I mean by the character being so invulnerable.
Aric also goes, I'm stepping in. You can't arrest him. He was coming in for his constabulary crimes, not for whatever you're accusing him from, and I shall let him escape. Aric literally uses his powers to allow him to escape, which is, and they agree, like, get a penthouse in the bougiest hotel, get the biggest penthouse. And, like, they end up all meeting up, and Aric finishes the battle with the Archknights. And at the end of it, he's like, well, you can't arrest him because he didn't actually do the things you said. And he's actually a good guy. But you can just stay here and watch him and make sure he doesn't do stuff because he's going to join your guilds, your order anyway. So you can just babysit. Like, the three of us will just watch him.
Babysit this one person. Also, the logic is like, he's like, oh, let me politic this. And he says, oh, well, Dalen has secrets about your order. And if you have him arrested, like, they're going to ask him, where did he get his powers from? And if the secret behind his powers is revealed, then everybody can get those powers. And you don't want that. So you're not. And it's just first of all, what a boring catch-22. And also, once again, like Maria said before, this Darkstone shit, which is one of the secrets that Dalen knows about, like, shattering sunicles and it's like a stew of dumbassery.
And you're thinking now, like, he's gone off and escaped.
I'm sorry, that was harsh.
No. You're completely correct, because I'm going to explain this next part. You think, oh my god, he's gone off to escape. What's going to happen? No, what's going to happen is he saw Lyra use some techniques he's never seen before, and so he's in the middle of all of this, just going to spend 45 minutes figuring out how to do what Lyra did, and also analyzing.
45 minutes of book time.
And also, he's like, I want to remember how she did this thing. Let me put 4 bonds of light to my memory, bro. And then he relives his entire life in excruciating detail in 16 seconds, and it's such a thing for his mind to handle that he bleeds, he sweats blood and dies, but his healing power kicks in at the last moment, brings him back to life, and he comes back, and he doesn't remember the whole experience, but he knows what happened, which is that he put too much into his memory and relived his life, and it caused him to die, so he can't do that. And so instead, he puts a little bit towards his memory, thinking about the specific moment, and he's able to, like, remember to it's one of those things that this is not how the human mind works, where sometimes human witness testimonial is flawed because it depends on what you're focusing. There's that one video you see circling around where it's some people with the lacrosse sticks and they're saying watch how many times the people in white pass the ball back to each other, and if you're doing that you don't notice in the middle a guy in a bear suit comes out and starts dancing, and at the end of it goes, did you see the bear? And you're like, there was no bear, but it's because you were paying attention to the people in white doing the thing and your brain wasn't taking all of the stuff that's in. So human memory, if you didn't pay attention to something or you didn't notice something happening, your brain can't just like go back, get a crystal clear, but he's able to put it together. And we're getting this whole detailed, like when I tell you the amount of time this book stops to be like, and then he figured out how to do another power thing with his power, and he basically learns how to store sunicles inside of his body, and so he now can just put Imperius inside of his body, and then he goes and he gets a different sword.
It's a level up. He's now learned how to store and now use dual weapons.
Yeah, his inventory got expanded.
And so he comes back and he goes to the penthouse and Aric is there, but with those two arch knights, which you as the reader already know because we were there for the scene where Aric had the conversation with them, but he's like, oh my god, why are they here? And he's like, this is what's happening. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. And Lyra's like, I also don't know why I argued myself into this. I do not want to spend time around you because looking at you is very triggering for me.
You forgot that he remembers that he assaulted Lyra.
The minute he sees Lyra when they step off that boat before, he calls her by name and instantly recognizes her. It's not like he's initially like, why does she look familiar? Why does she look familiar? And then halfway through the fight realizes it. No, immediately out the gate knows that she's Lyra and says Lyra, and she's like, the fuck?
Yeah, everybody's like, how do you know her name? And it's like, can you not for one instance pretend you are actually what you're trying to pretend you are?
Yeah, like, just what are you doing, you absolute idiot? Anyway, so then Lyra's like, I need to just see him as he is and not as his father. Aric and Cusack have a moment because they're from the same culture, and this is where they have the conversation about, this is why your culture so much because everyone's not naked all the time. Wild conversation. And then him and Lyra have a conversation where he's trying to eat and Lyra's like, listen, you're gonna go do this stuff, and he yells at her to the point that she like cowers, like she runs to her room and cries. He comes in, he hears a grown woman sobbing, he goes in to apologize to her, she looks up at him, he's crying, and he's like, I'm so sorry, I know what my father did to you, I know I said that you were just someone he described to me and he didn't tell me what he did to you, but he did tell me what he did to you, and I'm sorry that seeing me is like this thing. And it's this terrible moment because she thinks that this son of the person who did these things to her is so racked by guilt by what his father did. Like, it's just so disingenuous of a moment because one person has all the information and the other person does not have all the information. But she's able to so quickly, like, snap out of her response that she, like, they end up, like, having a moment where she's like, okay. And he's like, can we go to the constables now? Is that okay? And she's like, that was a concession to me wanting to take him to the constables. What a good bro.
Before this happens, they're sitting at the dining table. And he feels very uncomfortable with the whole situation.
Oh, God!
Because he has all the answers. And Lyra is looking at him as he's staring at her. And she's like, what? What's your problem? And the first thing he says, because he says it's the first thing that came out of his mind, which says so much, but is, you're beautiful.
Yeah, here's the thing. Lyra is sort of treated as though she is the love interest. Like, it's not explicit, but that's the role she fills.
They banter.
Yeah, they have, like, a whole hour of just, like, learning to get along, and they banter with each other, and she likes to bother people, and he likes to bother people.
And then they're, like, super teamwork effort stuff, and then they're, like, go on their little, like, Holmes and Watson adventure, where I cannot wait till we get to the warehouse scene, because oh my fucking god.
The rest of this plot is about trying to find the Donists. Now, the thing about it is, if you're thinking, that's weird, that's not really connected to the whole Sky Pirates thing. No, it's not. It's so weird. We spent all this time with the pirates, and then it's actually about the Donists at the end. Like, this book has such a weak idea of plot. Like, it just meanders so much.
One might argue, oh wait, there is a connection because the pirate was selling to the No, but the themes behind it and the concepts between the goals that the characters have never connect.
Yes. And so basically, there's a point where Lyra's like, when are you going to join our order so then I can tell you about your powers? And he was like, after I get rid of all human trafficking and take down the Daunists, because the Daunists, he just hates them. He wants to get rid of them.
Forget about his children that he wanted to meet. That thing that he said about finding his children, not a thing anymore.
The Daunists are, like, number one on his list, and she's like, oh, well, we can be the Daunists are in the city. And he's like, I'll use my super hearing. Also, they go to the constabulary, and they're like, okay, you're an arch knight, we'll call it good, goodbye. It's not even a thing. But anyway, and then he's like, let's get the Daunists. And she's like, this is also where you find out that his powers are super special. And everybody doesn't have just 4 bonds that they can put to anything. He does. She only has 2, but she has one particular thing that she can put extra bonds into because that's her specialization. Something that we're never going to touch on that he never learns about.
Specialization.
Yes.
Specialization of the skill tree.
Stacking.
Yes. Oh my fucking oh my god, when that was said, I was like, Lord help me.
So he uses his hearing, and then he hears someone calling for help, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna go help them. And she's like, if someone's crying for help, I'll go. And they go on a little adventure where they help, like, they just help people together for a while, and then finally they get to the Daunists, because he's like, eventually at some point I just have to not help the people crying for help. And they go to the Daunists. There's a scene where he meets an old guy who lived through the 4th night that I thought was going to come back. Like, I thought this old guy was going to be important. It doesn't.
Yeah.
No, it's just a significant scene that's given focus but never comes back. Anyway, he gets to the Daunists, and actually their leader is a really beautiful young woman
that smells of sex.
She smells of horny. She's horny for Dalen. And she's like, I want to bring back the Empire. And he's like, but what about all of these terrible things? And she's like, but also think about all of these things. And they're having this conversation. And eventually he gets so angry that in front of other people, he goes, I am Daedalus the Conqueror. And I think you're a fucking asshole, bitch. And she's like, there's no way you could be him. And he also, if you put a bond to your voice, it makes your voice really persuasive. So he gets her to tell him the plan, which is they're going to crash a floating island into the city to destroy the protective shield and destroy the city.
Even though it was just stated several chapters ago that the way the shield was made, which Dalen made, by the way, the way the shield was made makes it double, triple, a million times super strong, so nothing can get in.
Besides a specific type of ship that he created. But apparently they're going to use such a big enough island that it'll just disable all the shields. And he then kills all of them.
He smashes her head. He's like a grape. He explodes her head.
He explodes it with a punch. It's so weird.
And then kills all the other people that he claimed he was Daedalus the Conqueror too. And then he goes out and she's like, what happened? And he's like, I killed them all. Also, by the way, they're going to crash a giant island. And so then immediately the climax of the book is upon us, which is an island is going to crash into the city and they have to stop it. Now, normally the climax of a book is a conflict that has been built up well before this moment. It is something that you as a reader have a jonesing for. You know it's going to come. There's buildup. There's tension. We know the party we're going to be fighting against is established well beforehand. The Daunists have been a tiny fucking footnote well in the background. It's not something that feels like repeated or like it had actually any stakes. And it's crazy because this book, the plot is all over the place that you're like, oh, this is the climax? This is what towards? I had no idea.
It's such a strange thing because the Daunists definitely felt like a subplot that, like, if this were a series, which I'm assuming like it is, like, or something like that it was gonna come up later in a different book. That's the way the Daunists were addressed. The pirates too, to some degree, also vaguely felt like, oh, all these islands with all these, like, you know, people who are in the black market and stuff like that, whatever, generic shit, like that might come up later. So remember what I said before too, his main goal is just to go to the capital for paperwork.
That's been the plot.
That's why we were here. That's it. And so this book is crazy because it feels like the getting to the capital to do a thing should have happened in the first third of the book, and then while in the capital they discovered what the actual plot was. Yes. And then that took this last 75% of the book, and that's not it. When I tell you, it is wild. Also, God, so Aric fucks off while he goes off with Lyra. And then they're in their plan. They're like, she's gone to tell the Arch Knights what's gonna happen so they can do a thing. He has gone somewhere else, but then he goes back to get Aric to help because they're gonna need help. And then Aric is like, you blackened bastard, because Aric this whole time has been nursing suspicion that Dalen is actually Dalen Namara, aka Dalus the Conqueror, because he's seen all the fucking plot holes in Dalen's story. And he's like, so I went and I looked at your records and they don't exist. And I also spoke to a master sun forger who said that a bond might be able to go to a child, but it's definitely like the firstborn child. It is not one of the last in a sea of 100. So there's no way. So somehow you're young. And then we get this extended battle sequence. And again, it's so shitty because they both can heal themselves, so any damage either of them is taking feels so inconsequential, and he's gonna get into a fight with Lyra shortly after, and the same thing happens.
And we should point out, you might be like, hey, I thought that Dalen wanted to die. I thought that was his thing. He's okay with it because he's a terrible person. No, he now comes up with the rule that... Because remember, before the rule was that, oh, well, Ulrich has showed up, he's the light telling me that I should continue to live. So, but now that Ulrich has turned against him, he comes up with a new rule. And the new rule is, only if I lose the fight fair and square has the light decided I should die.
So I have to try.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's so dumb. And like I said all the way at the beginning of the podcast, this is when Oric calls him on his shit like we do, the audience. And he's like, you're absolutely delusional. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And he's right. And it feels very validating in that moment. And then you're gaslit by Oric's change of mood immediately after the fight ends, where he's like, also, can I just say, Oric is like, he definitely, he just whipped this out of Final Fantasy. He's got swords floating in the air. And they're
yes.
There's 4 of them that come in at once.
It's crazy, because this is also the moment where we find out that Aric was actually that revolutionary leader that led to Dalen's downfall and has a lot of hatred towards him. And there's a point where Dalen's like, you're just like me. And Aric's like, I'm not like you at all. I got power, I led a revolution, and then I devoted myself to being a light bringer, which is literally almost like a priest-like position. And if you lie or do anything that breaks the code that you've sworn to, you literally lose your power. And he's like, I'm not like you. And he's like, no, you're like me. When I saw those people, the aristocracy that had killed my family, and I had to kill them.
He gaslights him.
Yeah. And he's like, and you're like me, and where will this end? You'll feel just as bitter as you did when you thought I was dead before. The only way forward is to not kill me and maybe do something else instead. And
but
then
he doesn't say it. He
doesn't wink. And then Aric's like, ah! And then drops his sword and is like, oh, Dalen, I forgive you. And Dalen's like, what? You forgive me? And he's like, yes. I don't know when it happened, but I realized I have forgiven you, and it's not just because I have to, but I just do, and you're not that person. And suddenly, complete 360.
We got to talk about how stupid this is for a minute, because now they're back to being complete buddies. They're joking with each other, and he's like, I've seen how much you've changed. Forgiveness as a thing you do for yourself is very different than then going and treating the person like your buddy. He could forgive him and be like, hey, you got to go live your own life on your... I still don't like you. You can forgive someone without liking them. You can also, forgive them in an existential sense for you to move on, but still think there needs to be justice done. And that's what's really weird about this book is, it does not want to stick to the premise of... what if Stalin, whatever, like I've said. This book works so much better if the twist is that he was Dalen's son.
Yes.
That's the twist this book actually should have, and everybody's reactions make sense to. It doesn't make sense for this to be Dalen himself. Or Dalen's
Not at all. And also, Ben brings up the point that I wanted to bring up. Why does Aric not just say, yo, bro, so, yeah, you're arrested, come with me? No, he's gonna literally be his lawyer after this and fight for his, freedom? It's honestly very disgusting, because honestly, Aric was one of the few characters that you kind of like. You can't help but like him. He's not an asshole. He's directly contrasted with an asshole at all times. So he always seems like a good guy. I mean, he makes like food out of light and it's like sticky, but like, you know, he's a very likable character.
I found that gross the whole time.
That was so weird. That
I
was
did
very
not
strange.
like that. Do not give me food you made out of the light from your body. That just, I don't know where that light's been.
Yeah, no, Oric like immediately forgives him, and it feels so strange because then everybody else's actions also mirror that sentiment almost.
Again, Aric is the moral authority of the book and in universe a moral authority. And so when the book has him forgive Dalen, and not just forgive him, but again, go back to, oh, he's such a swell guy now. That is the reaction that the book is telling the reader to have, and especially because it makes so little logical sense.
Also, Aric, before he forgave him, told Lyra that Dalen was Daedalus the Conqueror. So now, then we have the battle with Lyra over all of this, and they have a giant battle, and then eventually they have to work together because they see the island that's floating towards them is covered in darkness, which means it's got shades on it, which means not only did they like send an island to come crashing towards them, but it's got a shade infestation, so you know lots of people are gonna die. And she's like, we need the Archknights, and he's like, let's go, there's barely gonna be enough time. Also, Aric's power is too depleted, and so he can't heal himself to be able to help in this, even though light bringers are useful because they can just shoot light at the shades to kill them. And so then, God, and so here we come to one of the most convoluted, dumbest things. So something that Dalen does during his fight with Lyra to get the upper hand is he's like, man, if you give me enough time, I can think of a way out of anything. So he's like, I'll stack my powers into intelligence.
Which he literally says.
And he's able to thwart Lyra by putting 3 of his bonds into sword fighting and 1 bond into speed, and thus he defeats Lyra but doesn't kill her. And then all of this is discovered. So then there's a point where they're on the ship, they have to get to Blackheart's ship, Zane helps them, they're flying towards the island, and they're like, oh god, what are we gonna do? And like they get to the island, it's covered in darkness, and all the other Archknights that were on the island are dead because the Daunists, for some reason, know the secret that you can nullify an Archknight's powers by touching them with
using
Darkstone.
Any single device in the world, which is all powered by Darkstones.
So if you put a Darkstone on an arrow and you shove it inside them, if they can't manage to pull it out of themselves, they cannot use their powers, which means they can't heal themselves. And the Archknights were completely, like, just blindsided by this. They have no recourse in this moment, so they all died, and she's sad because Cusack was one of them, and you are also, because, like, again, at this point, despite being kind of problematic, Cusack is one of the only characters not filleting the crap out of Dalen, and who was doing his own thing, and who cared about Lyra as a person outside of this whole situation.
He did fleet him a little bit. Earlier on, he stood up for him, and he was like,
yes,
yeah, he killed bad people.
Yes, a little bit. So he's dead, and they're like, oh no, and so they crush the people doing the spikes, but they're like, oh god, we can't stop it. So they go back on the ship, and Dalen's like, what am I gonna do? There's not enough time. And then he's like, brain blast, I'll just put all of the things like I did last time. So then he thinks of a thing, and he's like, what can I do? And he's like, I'm going to put all of my light into my sword. And so he goes to the prow of the ship. He makes them spin the ship around backwards, so the island is coming at them. He goes to the prow of the ship. He puts the sword across his arm, like so, I think. Or no, across his shoulder. He goes like, he does it back like this.
Final Fantasy. When he takes, like, control of the ship and he does, like, really super badass moves, yet again, in the middle of everything, Aric's like, oh my god, Dalen, I didn't know you could fly like that. And it's like,
can we just stop being shocked? He makes his sword, when he puts all the power to his sword, it extends the light power of the sword and makes it a giant sword. So giant, it cuts the planet in half. Because part of the problem here is that this island has a Darkstone core. That is how they're able to raise it and move it. And somebody has overtaken the core to make it crash into it. And so the only way to solve this problem is to get to the core and destroy it, but they didn't have enough time, so that's why he have this plan. So he uses his sword, which is just a normal sword, but it's a sonical, so he can make it, and it basically turns into a giant light shape of a sword that slices through the entire island, through the Darkstone core, cuts it in half, so the lower half crashes down and just hits the ground, and the upper half just floats up. You know, eventually, I guess it'll hit the continent the other way. I don't know. But anyway, so that happens, and he just cuts it in half. And you're just sitting, I was sitting there reading this, and I was like,
I was also very confused about the physics. Like, I'm just like, okay, so if this world does invert itself and it's all of that, how does that work with these things that are just gonna, like, I just don't, it doesn't, funnily enough, that is actually a very fascinating concept that could be enjoyable to explore in a book, like mechanically, and yet that is not what is explored mechanically through the book.
You may be thinking, oh wow, there'll just be a little bit of falling action after this.
no, there's 2 hours left.
Yeah. If you were thinking, you know what an epic fantasy needs? Some courtroom drama? Then boy, howdy, have we got the book for you. So he goes back, he tells everybody he's Dalen. They're all like, oh my god, we put you in prison. And so they're going to have a world Nuremberg trial for Dalen, where everyone he's wronged gets to come up and tell him how terrible he is. And it's so emotionally hard on Dalen. He's like, oh no, I have to hear about it. I'm so sad. All he ever says is I'm guilty.
He can barely walk.
Aric is maybe thinking like, maybe after you're executed, I'll bring you back. And because that's like one of my final powers. And Dalen's like, don't do it. I don't deserve it. And Aric's like, but you could do so much good. Again, Aric is the moral authority in this book.
Oh, also, something to explain. He almost died because he used a sunstone to surge his power to be able to do this thing that he did, cutting the giant island in half. And so everybody thinks he's going to die, and Lyra saves him, knowing he is Daedalus the Conqueror, saves him before he hits the ground, and then Aric is like, I will use my final miracle, because the thing you learn about bringers is when they die, they can use their death to create a final miracle. There's literally a place called the Luminary, which allows for sun forging, that was created in the death of a light bringer. And he's like, I'll use my... And I was like, that is the wildest thing for a legit Lightbringer to be like, I'm going to use my final miracle to bring back Daedalus the Conqueror, instead of just going, wow, in the end, he did a good thing. Wild. That's going to come up again, because throughout the book, or throughout this next thing, as Will was saying, he's going to be like, no, if you die, I'll just bring you back, which means he has to die.
He is willing to sacrifice for his best bro, the brutal dictator. It's such a deeply weird book.
Yep. This is the part where we start getting some numbers for the things he did. He killed, and just a certain portion of his killing, but he killed 28 million people. Directly and indirectly, dictators. And we also get some stuff about the women who he raped.
Which of the three of us want to describe this?
Which thing?
The last final gut punch in the last 16 minutes of this book, where I just went, what the fuck?
As all the people are going up, and as part of those people, we have the women that, well, the girls, really, that he essayed. And the ones that come forth that have born the children of Daedalus the Conqueror say, oh, he was a horrible man, but he is redeemable, and honestly, my child is the light of my life.
And I wouldn't have had that without him.
Multiple female characters say this. And then Dalen himself makes the observation to you, the reader, that, wow, the women that had children are the ones that aren't so mad at me. And the ones that didn't have the children are the huge bitches.
This is why it's because Lindbergh had mentioned this earlier, that it's implied that one of the reasons Lyra could never get over her trauma is because she hadn't had, because she ripped out her womb. Yeah. It is the most... do we even need to explain why this is the most disgusting thing in the world?
No,
absolutely not.
It just is. It's terrible. This is not how we should look at it, guys. It is this was real problematic.
Ben makes the point that I feel as well. The worst part about all of this, the worst part is the message, but the worst part is that this has nothing to do with any of the other stuff. So this Mormon stuff, now that you've mentioned it, is like, whether or not it's connected to that or some other aspect of the author, it is, we are waterboarded once again with that.
You could have made it so Lyra's parents were killed by what's-his-face, And the book would have functioned inherently the same, and you could have just taken all the other stuff out.
Yep.
Like, it is that, and because it's not like throughout his experience as this newborn, like, born again good guy, thing, that he's like, oh man, I still am really into young women, and even though I'm in a young body, it's problematic, and I have to fight against this, and this is something I need help for. No, it's just not a problem. The only time it comes up is when that one girl was like, I'm so traumatized. Please do it with me. Let me be naked. And he's like, wow, she's so beautiful.
Comfort me with your dick.
And then there's like a bunch of the other countries. This is where we learned that he like literally, not only did he tell this one ruler that they would get married and then slept with her despite the fact that that is super against her entire culture. He said that, oh, even though I'm not going to marry you, I won't say anything. And then he still outs that she did that to her entire country and is like, I wonder how she kept her position. And then she's like, he raped me. And he's like, no, I didn't, but I guess that's what you had to say to keep your power so people wouldn't think you were a slutty whore, even though I told you I was gonna marry you. It's wild. And the entire time Dalen is like, oh, woe is me. And he makes Aric swear that if he gets death, that Aric will not bring him back to life. But Aric's like, okay, I swear that, but I'm gonna make an argument that you should be allowed to live so you can continue doing good stuff for people. And here's the thing. I do not believe in retributive justice. I don't like, there's so much, like, I don't do the death penalty. Yeah. There's so many things that I have problems with. But in this world where this is established, that the fact that we're applying the restorative justice to Dalen, but we have actively denied it. Aric also shoved a pirate off a ship. Earlier, when they both have the ability to incapacitate people and just knock them out.
It's the butt of a joke. It's the butt of a joke. Every time they kill somebody, it becomes a joke. And so it becomes this strange, maniacal, like, inversion of what's supposed to be ethical. And
again, the book justifies it because they got a lot of light in their hearts. They got the light. Like, it is a fundamental fallacy because the people they killed didn't have a lot of light. And so we are value stamping people by this perceived idea. And again, light doesn't mean you're a good person or that you don't do bad things. It's supposed to, I guess, mean that you can be changed versus people who don't have a lot of light can't be changed. And it's just insane that we also don't meet someone who doesn't have a lot of light, who's just living a normal life, you know, because that's something that we should see, that like,
yes,
you know, I might not necessarily, like, and it's just wild, and it's so thinly applied, and there's so many holes in this argument, and this whole thing, and again, the obvious culmination of this book is that the court decides that they're not going to kill Dalen, that he is going to be denied his freedom, and he has to live with the Archknights and fight evil for the rest of his days. And at the end of it, Aric's like, you're a changed man, Dalen. And that's how the book ends.
No. No, he goes...
Oh, yeah!
He goes to the Lightbinder Academy, and Lyra's like, well, I guess we're working together. Even though, you know, I hate you.
Bizarre choice on the author's part, but so is everything else.
We only, at the end of the book, get an idea of what changed his mind in those 20 years, right after he fell and before he became, like, when he was an old man, like, what made him turn and realize he was a terrible person. Psych, we don't. He literally just says, like, and in those years in between, I learned, I thought about and I realized how bad everything I did was. That is the closest concrete description we get to how this man changed his mind. I don't understand how you could leave out such a basic, crucial point of story and world building. Like, this is such basic shit that you should be including in your novel. Yep. I don't understand the decisions in this book. I don't understand why the premise of Stalin had to be, what if Stalin, because I've watched a video with Shad in it where he talks about, like, well, you know, Genghis Khan, a lot of these big rulers, they did bad, like, sleeping around shit. And it's like, I don't understand why that was the thing you needed to focus on. Like, I don't understand why there needed to be so much sex stuff in this book. I don't understand why there needed to be so much assault stuff. And I don't understand. I mean, I do. I understand all these things. They're all in there because he's a weird Mormon dude whose weird views leaked into the book. But, like, rhetorically speaking, I don't understand.
Nemorales points out nothing has changed about Dalen. And this is the one of the biggest cruxes about giving us a flawed character who you're telling us is flawed and has these problems. Nothing about him has changed. He hasn't overcome his impulses. He still loses his temper and, like, kills people violently. Nothing about him from the start to the end has changed. So it literally, the character arc is for society. Learning.
Oh,
but
God,
just because you did
true.
bad things
Yes.
doesn't mean you
Oh,
have to kill the
God, you're
people who
right.
did the bad things. That's the character arc. It's not for Dalen. The entire book is everyone around Dalen realizing that actually, no, he's a good guy now. That's the arc. It's not that he, from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, has changed at all.
There are no real character arcs, except for, as Maria said, everybody else. Well, what I was gonna say at one point, there were two things, lost the one thing forever, but one thing I was gonna say almost feels dumb at this point to even mention because there's so many, like, I was gonna say that at the end of the novel, like, there's just too many other wrong things. This wouldn't have saved it, obviously, but why does he have to become an arch knight? Like, he has we have been constantly bombarded and harassed by how cool Dalen has made this world with all his nifty little inventions and stuff like that. So why aren't they just asking him to build infrastructure? If he was so great at it, why is that not part of his redemption arc?
You're so right, Katie, because him using any of his other skills to better society and that being his repentance, I mean, that should have been from the beginning. I argue Aric should have been like, no, don't kill people. You're not actually adding to the total good. There's ways to help people on an infrastructure or engineering level that you could do to add good. Or like a character like Rurouni Kenshin, whose only skill, he was raised from very young to be a assassin, so all he knows is killing, but then he can use that for protection and just not kill people, which he manages not to do while still doing good things. There are so many ways you can engage with this without being like, let the guy who kills people, but now he kills them for good.
No, there's a part in the book where he says, he says to Aric, like, we have to be savage, and in the dark so that other people don't have to be. And Aric, the moral authority of the book, is like, yeah, you're right, bro, that's true.
Batman uses that exact logic. I will be the Dark Knight. I will do the stuff that needs to be done. But he still doesn't kill people. You can have both.
In summation, for me, right? Beyond all the strange, sexual stuff and all of that, because that's such a loaded piece of thing that's a whole thing.
Right,
but
yes.
even beyond that, just storytelling wise, there are just so many gosh darn elements in this book. And it feels like a tornado of you just being assaulted by Mary Sue propaganda that Dalen's the best. And so anyway, I don't recommend this book. Don't read it. This is actually, I think, the only book I don't think is for anyone. I genuinely, no, I mean this. I do not think this book is anything that can bring happiness to anyone. And there are Children of Blood and Bone or whatever, right? We have that. We have, I don't know about the ones you guys have read. We have ACOTAR. Yes, exactly. All of those, at the very least, even though there are problems there, I can see someone enjoying it because there are aspects that are just like, people can just, disconnect, enjoy. Not everything has to have super crazy, awesome themes and a powerful message and all of that. However, everything that is in this book can be poorly applied to people who do not know these things, such as children or young adults. I would hope, but no, I teach young adults. No, there's no way they could understand the horrible moral issues in this, and it could poorly influence, not to mention, not a single part of this is satisfying to read. This is a book for no one.
Here's the thing. I think if you stop this book before the death sodomy, you would be like, that was an incredibly boring and uninteresting read.
Yes.
But whatever. He should have written a fantasy about a grampy old man on a fetch quest. That actually could have been a little funny.
I argue he should have been old the whole time, and he should have been teaching, and his value is him teaching and his knowledge that he brought.
Past the death sodomy part, the book reveals so many ugly things about its worldview, and so many just deeply toxic ideas about justice and poverty and assault and sex, that it's just, this book is for no one. People have said that it is. Daniel Green, a very well respected
Lord help.
booktuber, thought this was a really interesting book. I think he said it was a little amateurish in certain ways, but really an interesting book that people should pick up if they want their ideas.
It's a dangerous book.
It's a deeply irresponsible book. It's a deeply irresponsible book.
It's so rare that all three of us are on the exact same page with zero qualifications about a book.
It's incredibly rare. Usually I'm like, oh, but, you know.
You see the best of
there's that.
And our Discord as well is also just like everyone. We're just united.
Yeah,
and it's
universally.
wild. That rarely happens. There are so many times where we read something and like either the Discord really loved it and we hated it, or we liked it and the Discord didn't like it, or the Discord is divided and we're divided. Like, so rarely is there just a book that everybody reads and has the same response to. Like, it is, I don't think it's ever happened. I don't think there's been another book. Because even Fourth Wing, someone was like, it's trashy and I love it. Katie, it's trashy and I love it.
Well,
And
no. I did not say I love it. I said it's trashy, and I can see why some people would enjoy it.
And to be fair, I also get that about Fourth Wing. I don't think it's good or the best it could be, but like there is some redeeming value to it and some difference of opinion, subjective opinion.
And this is just wild. And again, I want to really emphasize that Katie and I, and I don't think Will knows a ton, but Katie and I's feedback is influenced by zero knowledge. We've discovered he was Mormon now, you know? And it is insane to me that, so, like, please, Shad, and apparently somebody mentioned somewhere, and I saw it briefly, because, again, I've been trying not to engage with any of it, but somebody mentioned, that he watches a lot of the commentary videos on this. And I just want to say, because, like,
Hi, Shad.
somebody mentioned in the thing, your dad, you're married, I hope, like, live your best life, dude. I didn't like this book, and it was wildly problematic for me. And if you do a commentary video responding to this, please don't. That's a like, yeah, don't. That's not something I want.
No. He won't name us because he last time he did this, he didn't name the one that annoyed him. He just started reading positive reviews of his book.
You should be able to take criticism on something like this. If you are an online personality, if you are an author, if you are an artist, and you're putting your work in the world, it is going to be criticized by some people, and you got to own it up. You didn't do great. This is not good. I will own it up when I don't do great. I did a horrible job the other day doing my job. I have written things that really suck. And you know what? Yeah, it hurts my feelings a little bit. But you know what? That's right. That's true. I could do better.
But also, fundamentally, we are a critique channel. We read books and we review them. At the end of the day, when we dislike stuff, it's not because we go into it. I knew nothing about this book, and I went in with zero expectations.
I always do that every single time.
Yes. The first Darkstone scene, I literally texted Will and went, oh my god, the world building in this is wildly clunky. Like, you can, by looking at my responses to, like, texting Will at a couple points in the beginning, you can see that just initially, I didn't enjoy this. We are a review channel. We don't like stuff sometimes. And, like, that's just how this works.
I knew going in that this was going to be a trash fire, but if this channel has proved anything, it's that authors cannot bias me. I really like Lindsay Ellis, and yet I shat on her book, the latest book. Akatar, I think is trash, but when I thought the first book was better than I thought it was going to be, I said that. Yeah. Often I try to be very even-handed in terms of things I think a book does well and the thing books doesn't do well. And again, I think there's a part of this at the very beginning where Dalen is just a crotchety old man where you're like, oh, okay, this isn't good, but like, you know, a 7-year-old could have written
Will had a way, when he was still in that portion, he was like, you know, it's not great, but I don't think it's terrible. And I'm sitting there going, what are you talking about? Have we read? And because I was also not at, like, the weird stuff yet, but I just, like, the clunkiness, the how he was doing stuff, I was like enraged, and I was like, Will, how are you not having the same reaction? And I was like, oh my god, is this going to be one of those ones where I hate it? And Will's like, yeah, it's not that bad.
I was worried about that too.
Yeah,
I was like,
shit. We all coalesced.
Even my husband, somebody completely removed from the podcast, doesn't even watch our videos, and doesn't really read on a normal basis, listened to it, and we were talking about it yesterday on the way to vote. You should all vote if you're in America. But anyway, we were on our way to vote, and he was like, you know that book you were listening to the other day? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, that was so bad. Like, I was like, he was like, it sounded like video game logic. And I was like, that's what I've been saying. And so someone like that also, and my husband's neither here nor there on it. So anyway, also, I specifically go into every single book without knowing anything. And I don't even want to look at other people's reviews because I want it to be a bald experience for me. So that way, now that reduces my ability to analyze sometimes. And I'm not able to like, really interact with other people's really great commentary. But I feel like that makes it more genuine, at least like for you. We have one little point, well, like 1, 2, 3, 1/3 of us is just like an everyman. It's not good, Shad. It's not good.
It's so bad. It's just genuinely. And what's funny is I was watching a video yesterday of him unboxing special editions that they kickstarted. They also kickstarted a short film that never got made. There's also a comic version of this. He is still to this day repping this book hard. This is not like, oh, I wrote something 4 years ago and like maybe meh. But no, he's still repping this book. Shad, if you're watching this, you're bad at writing and your political views are
Your technical writing, obviously you can write. Some of the sentences are clean, some of them are not. Overall, you need to reevaluate what you're peddling, and you need to decide what it is you're doing when you're writing. Are you telling us a political message? Are we having an adventure? Are you putting your sexual beliefs inside? Figure out what the fuck you want to do with your books and then go do it. I mean, I'm still going to say I don't agree with your beliefs and I think it's highly problematic, just like the rest of us. But that being said, at least make it clean.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many basic, we didn't even really go into it, but there's so many basic writing problems with this book.
Yeah.
The whole thing
And also,
feels like
it's
like
boring. It's just boring. At least if you're going to write like a, like, listen, there are books, like, almost every writing is political in some sense because humans are political creatures and storytelling is inherently political in some way. Okay? So even if you're going to write like something with these kind of stuff in it, at least have it be interesting. It was also very boring for the most part.
It is the most irresponsible book I think we have read, and I think that it should not have the content that it has. Writing-wise, I feel like there are worse books writing-wise that we have read, but there are no worse books ideas-wise and content-wise that we have read.
Which one was worse in terms of like writing?
I would actually have to think about it. Yes, there you go, Cyborg Tinker.
I thought Cyborg Tinker was about this level. I will say this is not the book that enraged me the most, because when I get enraged, it has to do with like what the perception of the book is and what people, so like Song of Achilles, for example, the fact that everyone faps to that book really it induces rage in me. This book is merely bad and toxic and bad. But like, you don't have a bunch of people filleting it besides Shad himself. I think that's going to be it for now. This is the longest one now at 3 hours and 20 minutes.
I love you all, but
I don't want to edit this. All right. We'll talk to you later, our parasocial darlings.
Bye.
Bye.